Meet a handsome blonde named Kevin. He is a daring and arrogant mercenary with a terrible scar on his face. And this is right, a dark-haired, middle-aged man who is a good carpenter. Next to him stands a plump and shy country guy, Howard. He has a small stall in Halsea. It's hard not to notice the red-haired beauty, Joan. The girl is very mysterious, but looks sweet and good-natured. Stern and heavy eyes, black hair. This charismatic guy is an ordinary farmer, Peter. There were 10 of them in total. They found themselves in a strange, frightening place. None of them yet know what they will experience. The guys are trying to find out why they are here, arguing. But the only thing they found out is that they are all from Tanya. Suddenly, a striking creature appears and warns our heroes that they should be ready for battle, because the master has opened a rift in space and time. Everyone looks in surprise at the small creature, which glows and also flies. The magical entity meets the heroes, and it turns out that this guardian fairy is Izzy, who immediately declares her severity. Kevin comes up and brazenly confronts the fairy that she is to blame for bringing them to this place. Izzy tries to get rid of him, saying that it is none of his business. This attitude quickly infuriates the mercenary. He grabs his sword to punish the impudent guardian, thinking that he will force an answer out of her. The fairy takes a deep breath and warns him not to approach her, because otherwise she will take his life. Of course, such rudeness infuriated Kevin, and he decided to put an end to this small fry once and for all. Izzy's cheeky smile indicated that this was not the first time she had encountered something like this, and clearly already knew the outcome of the events. At that same second, Kevin loses his head, and it flies far away due to the fairy's powerful blow. Blood floods the entire floor. His eyes roll back. It becomes clear that the rude mercenary is dead. The faces of everyone else were frozen in horror at the picture they saw. The heroes were shocked and scared. No one expected this from the little fairy. Izzy's sweet face turned into a terrifying one. Her gaze said that this would happen to anyone who tried to raise a hand against her. The frightened heroes began to ask why she acted so cruelly and what she even wanted from them. But she only repeated that they needed to fight and win. Suddenly, an announcement appeared that the group had been formed and the master decided to start. Izzy warned everyone that they were ready. With one swing, the little guardian fairy opened a huge rift into the unknown. It shone with a bright blue light and was blinding. The names of the first who must enter the fissure are called. Everyone looks into it with fear, but no one dares to move. Izzy kindly invites the heroes to go through the rift, gently hinting to them that if they do not do this, they will repeat the fate of the mercenary. However, she is interrupted by Peter, which greatly irritates her. He manipulates Izzy by talking about her desire to get to the top of the tower, and that for this she needs to ask the master to choose weapons for the heroes because they are all 1-star, and the only 2-star has just died. Otherwise, they will go to certain death. Joan looks at them from the side and does not understand at all what Peter is talking about and why he knows all this. The fairy examines the mercenary's corpse, realizing that she has deprived the group of a strong hero and agrees with the farmer's proposal. At this moment, a computer hologram appears in front of her, in which she turns to the master with a request to give the heroes equipment and weapons to increase their chances of winning, to which the master responds positively and supplies them with a starter set. Wright asks Peter if he knows anything about this place, but he says that he has not been here for a long time and is poorly informed. Joan has more and more questions for the seemingly ordinary farmer. Black-haired Peter points the heroes to the arsenal and commands them to take weapons, announcing the imminent start. The other heroes begin to be puzzled and ask him what he is talking about. But Peter calmly says that a battle is coming. Naturally, everyone is excited and hesitantly takes up arms. Because no one prepared them for this, they will fight for the first time. The heroes do not know what to expect next beyond the rift. Returning from the arsenal, the guys noticed that Kevin's corpse had mysteriously disappeared, and only blood remained on the paving stones. But the strict guardian fairy told them not to pay attention to this, and the first 5 moved forward. Old Man Wright and 4 other heroes headed towards the bright light. They carefully and cautiously walked into the cut. Joan carefully watched Peter. She decided whether she needed to team up with him, because for some reason unknown to her, he knew more than others about this place, about the fact that they needed weapons and equipment. Unable to restrain herself, she bombarded him with questions about why he knew so much, what kind of fairy she was, what was behind the gate. But he only coldly replied that they needed to kill enemies in the arena, and everything else did not depend on them. At some point, announcements about the deaths of heroes began to appear, which greatly disappointed Peter and worried Joan. Peter didn't expect anything else from 1-stars. Joan still didn't understand what was happening, but he answered her questions to keep her quiet. When everyone in the group was killed, the farmer was wary because it happened suspiciously quickly, and the fairy nearby shuddered in bewilderment. because the heroes lost only on the first floor, which was unheard of. The already angry Izzy turned to the remaining heroes and shouted to go into the rift, as it was their turn. A cunning old man approached her and complained about his arthritis, saying that he couldn't even walk, with a clear hint of expelling him from the group. But the fairy only said that they were idiots, because recently the grandfather had been walking normally and had not appeared. Peter moved forward, ready to fight, followed by the others with fear in their eyes. Grandfather had to be dragged by the collar. He tried to come up with reasons not to go there right up to the gate, but he was forcibly dragged, no matter how hard he tried. They entered a huge hall resembling a temple. It was dark and only the light from the huge gates illuminated their path. Inscriptions appeared in front of the heroes, saying that they were now on the first floor of the main dungeon, and they would need to climb to the top and save the world. An announcement about the opening of the gates popped up. The brave farmer commanded to go forward, and they were all apprehensive, but went into the unknown. The team found themselves in the middle of a field, illuminated by a crimson sunset, on which there was not a single soul except them. Everyone froze in anticipation of something terrible. A moment later, a task appeared to destroy the enemies. A terrifying horde of nasty green, with red eyes and teeth sharp as blades, armed with simple weapons, appeared out of nowhere and began to actively attack the group. Peter warned the heroes to fight and pull themselves together, otherwise they will be killed by these vile creatures. But when he turned around, he saw how 3 men from the team began to run away from the monsters, saving their miserable lives. However, the dared souls who fled from the battlefield were stopped by a transparent wall that outlined the boundaries of the test. The guys flew into it with a roar. They were discouraged by such an unforeseen circumstance. With pain from hitting the wall, they tried to scream loudly to be let out. The grandfather, who had clearly forgotten about all his illnesses, began to furiously beat the invisible barrier and become indignant, demanding that he be immediately released from here. Peter and Joan, who had not fled when they saw their first enemies, looked at these unfortunate cowards with obvious disappointment. They immediately realized that they needed to act in a coordinated manner, not relying on the others. Peter said that he would go into close combat, and Joan would need to prepare to shoot at the goblins with a bow. At that very second, a crowd of monsters attacked them to tear them to shreds. The battle began. At the moment of tension, we are suddenly transported to the loading screen of a game called Choose Me. The rules and goal of the game are displayed on the phone screen. The goal is to get to the 100th floor of the tower. You must create items to improve and strengthen the heroes, work out tactics to pass each stage. It turns out that all this time a young guy named Tim was playing the game, sitting at home. He chose the hero Peter for himself to complete the floors. Unfortunately, he has bad luck. Having opened thousands of cards, he was unable to get a 7-star hero, although everyone already has them. Choose Me differs from its peers in rather harsh rules. The heroes have only 1 life, regardless of the number of stars. It will be impossible to return them, so he should be careful. A black-haired guy opens a dungeon and is bombarded with warnings that all his heroes are experiencing fear, which reduces all characteristics by 30%. He doesn't understand at all why the heroes are so afraid. One of them even wants to retreat and experiences panic. Immediately, a monster of level 999 appears on the playing field and pierces all the heroes through. The game ends with a loss. The guy does not understand why this happened and what kind of strange bug this is. Suddenly, a terrible call comes from the phone, and the same monster from the game appears, who says that he found the guy, who, in turn, is terribly scared and confused. He suddenly plunges into darkness and sees nothing. A notification about creating an account pops up in front of him. He is asked to select the name Anything and is confirmed without his participation. The guy is incredibly scared because he doesn't understand where he is and why the choice of name is confirmed for him. He is welcomed into the game and offered to start training, after which he can receive a reward. He is transported to the burning city in the body of the hero Peter, and his game begins with a narration and a story about where and who he is. In an unremarkable town, there lived a guy named Peter, Tanya. A land where people lived together with other races. An unknown enemy attacked these peaceful lands. Master, you need to climb to the top of the tower to save this world. Tim has a training task. Destroy the goblins who have invaded the city. This plunges him into shock. No one prepared him for this. The guy frantically hopes that this is not true. But he didn't have time to understand what was happening because a goblin with a sharp blade and burning eyes had already attacked him, wanting to kill him. The hero repels the creature's strong attack with a quick blow of his sword. The goblin's blade flies off, and Tim furiously cuts the enemy. The task was completed, but the young man could not come to terms with the fact that he had personally killed another creature, that he was inside the game. As he walked, The picture around him changed to a huge bright square, where he had already been when he played Pick-Me through his phone. Notifications popped up for the master with an offer to summon an allied hero before the next task, after which the master agreed and received 500 crystals as a reward. The doors of the main building opened and the light pouring from them illuminated the entire area, and the hero himself. A beautiful girl knight with golden hair, in shining armor and a long sword appeared in front of Tim. The guy looked at what was happening in surprise and tried to understand what kind of call it was, who she was. The girl looked at Tim with a cold gaze and decided to find out who this young man was. The hero introduced himself, and the knight told him her name, Helen, after which the master united them into a group and they went into the dungeon. Helen killed the goblins one by one with merciless blows, unlike Tim, who had never held a sword in his hands before and had no experience at all. Thanks to the girl, they won. Helen received a level increase as a sign of good work, and Tim tried to catch his breath and collect his thoughts. These heroes were too different. But after that, the guy had a problem, since the last part of the training began, namely synthesis, a way to strengthen heroes. Then he realized that he was finished. His sad thoughts were dispelled by a daring female voice, which demanded that he quickly go to the synthesis. When the guy raised his head, he saw the guardian fairy, Izzy, whom he clearly did not expect to meet. She was amazed to learn that he knew her. Tim in the body of the hero. Peter tells the fairy that he was a player and introduces himself. Izzy can't find Tim in the list of heroes, only Peter, which confuses her. The guardian nervously asks if he is from Earth, to which Tim answers positively, and the fairy begins to scream and rush around in panic because this simply cannot be. Then he sharply turns to the guy and commands him to go to the synthesis, but he is afraid that he will simply be killed there. Izzy doesn't bother with him for long and forcibly throws him into the synthesis room. Tim falls onto the cold floor with a crash. Synthesis begins and the entire space is covered in blue fire. If we talk in more detail about synthesis, then this is the strengthening of heroes by combining them. One of them is sacrifice to strengthen the other. The problem for the black-haired boy is that he only has 1 star, and the knight has 4. An adequate player would never sacrifice Helen for him. When Tim was already preparing for his death, they announced that the synthesis was completed and they chose the girl as a sacrifice, not him. Helen began to disappear in blue flames because the master decided to strengthen Tim. She only managed to wish him good luck. Now the young man was left alone in an empty cold hall where the last particles of the once beautiful night girl disappeared. Soon, Tim, now Peter, went into battle with the team again. He was still tormented by the question why the master merged such a cool character with 4 stars and left him. Maybe he was stupid, inexperienced, or did he have a plan? While the guy was thinking about this, a clever goblin attacked him from behind and cut off his right hand. The hero immediately attacked the vile monster with a blow to the head, leaving no chance of life. He constantly thought about that level 999 demon who forcibly brought him here. He hated him and was determined to take revenge. Sitting with a wounded hand after the battle, he thought about the mechanics of the game, that the players actually do not directly control the battles, and all battles are carried out by combat artificial intelligence. But even so, the game gained 1 million downloads. But there is only one reason for this. This is the opportunity to observe this world like God. Tim recalled how he was the same player, created items, pumped up heroes, built tactics. He decided for himself that he would not give up and would reach the top of the tower. This task was successfully completed and useful resources were obtained, and Joan was able to increase her level. Peter became the most valuable hero, his stern face adorned on the highlighted card. After the fight, Peter went to train. He had already come to terms with what was happening. Because whining is for losers, you can't give up. He talked about death in this game, that there are 2 types. On the battlefield and during synthesis, he knew that heroes with 1 star are useless and are more often disposed of because they are just ballast. The guy was running, but all his thoughts were filled only with the fact that he had weak characteristics, slow leveling, that he had to become stronger, otherwise he would be wasted. He trained with the scarecrow, did strength training without stopping. He promised himself that he would strengthen his body and spirit, take revenge, and return home. His thoughts are interrupted by the voice of Joan, who has come to find out how Peter is and to share her thoughts and experiences about this place. She shared with him her intention to become stronger and more resilient in order to survive, because she understood that tears would not help, but would only make the situation worse. While the girl was speaking, she took a bow, pulled the string, and shot straight into the head of the training dummy, which once again spoke of the firmness of her intentions. Peter began asking about her archery skills to see if she would be a good fit for the Alliance. Analyzing the fact that she has skill with weapons, even though she is weaker than him, Joan had no problem killing goblins in her first battle. She quickly moved on from the death of other people, clearly sets goals. He realized that she is a diamond in the rough. Having agreed to create a group and help each other, Peter extended his hand. Their firm handshake gave them a relationship bonus that will help them later. The hero decided to call Izzy, shouting her name loudly. The irritated fairy quickly appeared in front of him, declaring that she was very busy. The keeper immediately warned that he was not going to answer stupid questions, and if he wanted to know something, let him go to the top of the tower because all the answers were there. After interrupting Izzy, Peter asks if only he can see the status windows, but she begins to be indignant that this cannot be. And it is precisely this reaction that indicates that the guy is the only one who sees the system messages addressed to the master. With the second question, he decides to find out what will happen if the master quits the game, to which the fairy replies that he should pray so that this does not happen. He was still worried about the situation with the synthesis, when for some reason the master merged a 4-star hero for him, missing such a rare chance. The third question about the different passage of time in the game and in the real world infuriated the fairy. But her reaction again spoke for itself, which meant the difference in time. The enraged Izzy no longer knew what to do with herself, because she can only intervene in case of disobedience to the master or self-defense. In this way, the hero could learn most of the rules of this world, which greatly infuriated the fairy. Excited, Joan asked to tell what they were talking about, and Peter told her about some rules that will help her survive and get to the top, that she needs to train more to increase her capabilities. Black-haired learned another interesting feature of this world. All the essentials and food are updated every day. You can also get other things, just think. And it will appear by the fireplace or in the closet, but this does not work with game items, weapons, or money. The results of the training are also different. Now he learns about mechanics that he didn't even know about when he played himself. For example, even among the heroes of the same star class, there are more talented ones. Their distinguishing feature is hard work. Soon, the master will begin to sort heroes according to 3 criteria, one of which is fortitude, because the master does not need heroes who tend to panic on the battlefield. The second is, of course, skills. High-ranking heroes are called up already with skills, but 1-star ones require hard work to unlock them. The third point is physical training, which is what he focused on. 3 days later, the master entered the game again, during which time Peter managed to gain only 2 skills. Suddenly, the call for new heroes began and 3 guys entered the world. A middle-aged man with a fearful look is Stanley, an aggressive guy of oriental appearance is Phil, and a young tall blonde man is Charlie. Joan immediately ordered them to prepare for battle, where they need to fight and survive, after which everything will be explained to them. Gorgeous Izzy opened a rift in space and time with a slight wave of her hand. Peter and Joan hastily began to collect weapons in the arsenal, since there was little time before the start of the battle. As soon as the heroes arrived in a panic, they began to bombard the fairy with questions. Joan tried to restrain them somehow, warning that it was better not to interfere with the Guardian. However, the attempts were in vain, and Peter and Joan went ahead, leaving the annoying newcomers to Izzy. As soon as they passed into the rift, 3 heroes flew in behind them and collapsed to the floor, whom Izzy had to forcefully push here. Before the rift closed, the fairy smiled gently and told them to have fun there. A blue circle that appeared below them transported the group to the battlefield, to the second floor, where the goal of the task emerged, to destroy the enemies. At that moment, goblins of the 3rd level and steppe wolves of the 4th appeared with hungry eyes. The 3 newcomers turned pale from horror, and their characteristics dropped by 30%. Joan began to worry herself, but Peter decided to dispel her fear by touching her with his shield, which greatly excited her. This action quickly brought the girl to her senses, so the hero immediately ordered her to take 2 goblins, and there would be wolves on him. They decided to forget about the other heroes for a while, because they would be of no use. Immediately, monsters began to attack them, eager for their death. Peter pierces the wolf's skull with 1 strong blow, but realizes that with such a poor weapon, 1 blow will not be enough. He gathers all his strength and cuts the air with a sharp blade. Having hit the wolf, he cuts it in half, blood spills on the ground, and the monster dies. While Peter was distracted by the first creature, a second steppe wolf attacked him from behind. But having managed to defend himself, the wolf crashed his fangs into a wooden shield. In one motion, he throws the monster aside and mercilessly kills it with his sword. Having finished with his part, the young man asks Joan what happened to the goblins he ordered her to kill. But he sees a terrible but partly funny picture. There are so many arrows in the dead goblins that they all look like porcupines. The guy reassured the clearly tense red-haired beauty with the fact that they were already dead. The heroes successfully cleared the floor, received rewards, and calmly left the cut for their city. Suddenly, unexpectedly for everyone, the earth began to shake and rise. It turned out that they began to rise to the next floor. Naturally, the master will continue to rise, but with such weak heroes, it will happen very slowly. Peter approaches Izzy, who yawns sweetly and declares that she is very tired, not understanding why a small creature can get tired when others are fighting. Having gone into the arsenal, he analyzes his changes and understands that his intelligence decreased by 1, but his strength increased by 2. His characteristics increased by only 4, and his pumping speed generally improved. He became more and more powerful. As he exits the armory, he notices Stanley and Phil yelling at Joan as if it was her fault that they were there, forgetting that moments ago she may have saved their lives. Looking at the 1-star heroes, it became clear why they were considered expendable. He remembered Kevin, who had 2 stars, which meant his skill with weapons, and apparently he was a good mercenary. The image of Helen, who was with 3 stars and without hesitation, rushed into battle, immediately flashed through my head. Then red-haired Joan approached Peter and invited him to explain everything to the newcomers, but he said it was not worth wasting his time on them. Looking at the trio who did not know how to fight, it was clear that they would soon die, and there was no point in wasting energy on them. Phil rudely butts into their conversation with a question for Peter, who in turn replies that he is not going to pay attention to him. This attitude angered Phil, and he took the hero by the collar. The black-haired young man, without hesitation, hit the impudent newcomer in the jaw. Looking into the eyes of Phil lying on the ground, he said that while they were hiding behind them, they were fighting, after which, without waiting for an answer, he left. The next day after physical training, weapons training began. Peter developed skills in striking with a sword, and Joan shot with a bow. That trio didn't even appear. It seems they were going to look for a way out of here, as if there was a way out. The next stage of the training was a joint battle, where Joan shot and Peter fought back with a shield. There were so many arrows that at some point one pierced his thigh. Of course it hurt, but the hero managed to pull it out, and the wound instantly began to heal. There was no stopping him. He continued to train despite the fact that Joan already wanted to stop, thanks to which they were able to improve their skills. Their training was interrupted by a sharp call to the square from Izzy, who notified everyone about the master's entrance into the game. The girl received this news with joy, because she really wanted to finally test herself in battle with new, upgraded skills. Peter was surprised at how quickly Joan mastered it. Of course, a trio of recruits were waiting for them in the square, already arguing with Izzy, who complained about the food and did not want to go into battle. Life apparently taught them nothing, as they quickly received a great kick from the little fairy. No longer able to restrain herself, the fairy attacked the pile, where she brutally beat the annoying heroes who begged for mercy. You had to see their faces after the fight with the baby. Swollen, as if from wasp stings, all covered in bruises and abrasions. The guys who had once screamed at the top of their voices about freedom were now silently trying to survive the pain. The entire group of heroes was transported to the battlefield, where, as usual, only Peter and Joan prepared to fight. With quick, strong blows, they dealt with all the monsters on this floor. To be honest, they themselves were already bored with these monotonous battles, because they easily coped with killing such weak creatures. Unfortunately, the legendary trio stood there all the time and didn't try at all to prove themselves on the battlefield. But the other 2 heroes got all the experience. Suddenly, an advice appears on the screen to repeat the passage so that the naughty heroes begin to fight. This news did not make the guy and the girl very happy. So, they are transported again to the first floor, where they were previously. They are attacked by low-level goblins in small numbers. Joan kills all enemies at once, and the mission ends. And again, this unfortunate proposal appears to repeat the passage, because the lazy heroes again stood still instead of using this chance. Quickly going through tests one after another, killing monsters, the hero is not given a break, but is sent back again. The already tired couple tries to catch their breath and hopes that they will not be sent to fight the goblins again. Fortunately, they are released from the battlefield through the cutback. Joan is terribly tired and tired of guarding cowardly guys. She really wants this to stop as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the launch of the synthesis process is announced, and the doors to the hall open. Stanley, Phil, and Charlie look in that direction with disbelief and do not understand what will happen now. At this moment, we are introduced to the layout of the area. The map shows a workshop, square, recruiting hall, air dock, training arena, and residential area. Now let's return to the entrance to the synthesis hall, where now the master will choose who to sacrifice and who to improve. He knows about the achievements of the heroes, who fights, and who just stands on the sidelines. The little guardian commands Joan and Stanley to immediately undergo synthesis, since they were chosen by the master himself. The old man, in a panic, begins to justify himself by saying that he was dragged here against his will. But no one is interested in his opinion. Peter puts Stanley in his place, reminding him that all this time he stood behind the backs of others during battles, that he was given a chance to prove himself several times, and he himself conveniently missed everything. Forced into the synthesis room, he is still trying to scream and ask to be released. He is scared and confused. Sometime later, the synthesis process begins, and the terribly frightened old man begins to disappear in blue flames. Joan, who does not understand anything, who saw with her own eyes how the man evaporated, comes out of there safe and sound with an increased level and a new skill, Eagle Eye. In a menacing voice, Izzy commands Peter and Phil to go to the synthesis. Worried, Phil looks at the calm expression on Peter's face. He doesn't know what's going to happen or to whom of them. Phil begins to laugh hysterically, thinking that he will now be sent home and will be free. His dying cry sweeps across the square, and Peter, already upgraded thanks to synthesis, emerges from the hall. Joan realized that if the master decided that he no longer needed the hero, then he would simply disappear in this room. On the one hand, it was creepy, but she herself complained about the annoying new guys. The next day, as soon as Joan saw Peter in the training arena, she immediately bowed to him. This embarrassed him, because it was unnecessary. The girl explains that in this way she shows that she will now count on him, since he said that if she sticks to him, it will save her life. At this moment, Charlie, who was the only one who did not undergo synthesis and survived from that trio, bursts onto the site. He immediately apologized for his behavior and expressed a desire to change for the better. Peter throws a training spear at him, saying that in the beginning he also didn't know how to do anything, just like Charlie, that he would have to try hard to achieve good results and survive. The spear is the easiest weapon for beginners to master. They will have to train with it and stand in position for average combat. The black-haired man ordered the newcomer to prepare for a training battle. In one motion, Peter flies up to the stunned blonde. Taking all his courage into his fist, Charlie still swings, closing his eyes. It is this mistake that helps Peter attack him with a kick to the stomach, since he was left unprotected. The poor guy begins to vomit due to a strong blow directly to the ground. In a stern tone, Peter says, "If he has someone to return home for, then let him fight with all his might." Charlie had a little sister to whom anything could happen if he couldn't get out of this place. He brought the sharp end of the sword to the newcomer's throat and told him to think about synthesis, because it was not so useless, especially if he did not want to die from the clutches of monsters. Next to them appeared an announcement about the creation of an additional building for the arsenal, namely a forge, which would be very useful for the hero in the future. Calling out to Izzy, who immediately appeared nearby, Peter asked if she was generating messages with advice, and if she could access the internet. It turned out that the fairy had access to a forum with strategies, which Peter knew a lot about, because he was also a player, and he also mentioned a very famous player, Leo, which the keeper was very surprised by. She began praising the master of all masters, the god of this game named Leo, saying that he would be in first place if he got even one hero of 7 stars. Peter asked why Leo hooked her so much. It turned out that he could make the impossible possible, according to Izzy, to which the guy smiled caustically. The fairy tries to tell her something more about her beautiful Leo, but Peter gently stops her. The phrase comes out of his mouth that he is the real Leo, whom she praises so much. The keeper falls into a stupor and says that this is some kind of stupid lie. But the hero interrupts her, dictating the account number, which only the owner and manager of the server can know. Urgently, Izzy gets into her computer and tries to get to the bottom of the truth by looking for the account of her beloved Leo. And as soon as she realizes that the real Leo was in front of her all this time, she flies up to him with a pen and pad for an autograph. She says that she is a member of the fan club, and if she gets Leo's autograph, she will be able to become a member of the highest level, which is very honorable. Suddenly, she feels a wave of shame for having said so much to the real Leo. Izzy abruptly remembers Leo about Nilfhair. She excitedly asks Peter what will happen to him without him, but he himself doesn't know. Nilfhair is the settlement of the character Leo, 13 floors of a huge fortress with a capacity of 20,000 people, where most of the buildings are upgraded to levels 18-22, but the master himself is now inside the game. The guardian fairy worries about the inhabitants of his settlement, but Peter indifferently suggests that she dissolve the settlement if she is so worried about them. It turns out that Anything is the master of this account, a person from Earth, and the heroes who are called here are not artificial intelligence at all, but real people coming from different worlds. A simple player who likes to play does not know this. For him, heroes are ordinary consumables that can be exposed to any danger. Peter wanted to ask Izzy if he could return home if he climbed to the top of the tower. But alas, the fairy knew nothing about this, as well as about who moved him here. The keeper reveals to him that she has the right to give the master advice on opening and closing buildings, helping and choosing something, but that's where her powers end. The system for creating an infinite number of heroes with thousands of different combinations of skills turned out to be a lie. Quantum artificial intelligence was a hoax. The heroes turned out not to be an advanced machine, but real people. Endless options for content and reality. A million different worlds. Who would have thought that what was happening in the game was real? Leo's rash actions in the past doomed many people to death. Peter told Izzy to listen to him if she wanted to climb up. She obediently agreed with her idol Leo. Analyzing his team members at the next training session, Peter highlighted some points for himself. Joan is simply a genius. She grows at a speed inaccessible to other heroes. She holds a dagger for the first time, but very quickly got used to it. The same cannot be said about Charlie. With his successes, he would rather die on the battlefield. After training, Joan decided to call herself Peter's first assistant, but Izzy immediately glared at her and declared that she was number one. From overexcitement, the little fairy almost let slip that Peter was Leo's master, but he shut her up in time. The heroes decided to walk around the city. Peter asked to open a warehouse for them, and now the obedient Izzy unquestioningly fulfilled his request. Inside were useful materials such as iron, leather, and boards. Then they went to the forge, which the fairy safely opened for the team. Standing at a hot furnace to create equipment, penalties began to come into the game for the fact that there was no improvement in the structure, master blacksmith and blueprint, which made the chance of success terrible. Peter decides to start creating objects and selects the difficulty level Extreme Hell, which terribly scares the keeper because there is a triple penalty. But he only asks her to watch what he will do now. This is a mini-game for masters that is usually skipped, although the rewards are solid. Peter's timer lit up for 3 minutes, during which he had to create a weapon. He calmly pressed the start button and the timer went. At the same moment, Master Leo demonstrated the legendary movement of 1,000 hands, with which he bewitched the Guardian Fairy. And here is an absolute success. Peter receives a forged longsword rank. C, durable, light, sharp. Then he can create a balanced short bow, a sharp long spear, and a strong iron shield with the same ease. Stretching, the hero exits the minigame so as not to attract unnecessary attention. He decided to focus on these items for now. The next day, Joan admires the new bow, but Peter warns her to use the sidearm feature to prevent it from being stolen. This time, the master decided to send the 3 heroes to battle the harpies and goblins. The heroes distributed responsibilities and moved into battle. With a terrible, deafening scream, a flock of monsters attacked the group. Charlie, experiencing fear, waved his weapon in different directions, which greatly worsened his performance. In order to avoid failure, Joan gave him a tasty slap in the face to bring his morale back into line. Quickly realizing that his life would be in danger if he did not pull himself together now, he concentrated and returned to the fight. After clearing the floor, the newcomer, disappointed in himself, began to express concerns about his future fate because he performed poorly in battle. At that moment, a notification popped up about adding Charlie to his favorites, which indicated that the master liked him. Unable to contain his delight, the guy exclaimed to the entire square that he was able to do it. Joan noticed that first Peter's first subordinate achieved success, and now the second one did the same, but Peter immediately said that they were not his subordinates. He fondly remembered his real subordinates from Nilfgaard, where the group of 5 were all level 99 6-star heroes with their divine and other powerful skills. He hoped that he could meet them someday. Master Leo was calm for his world, because this is an AFK game. So Hannah, the Vice Master, can handle the controls quite well, especially since Holly ensures her. They are both so smart that he sometimes wondered if it was really artificial intelligence. Then we suddenly see Hannah standing on the edge of Nilfgaard, and behind her in a white robe, Holy. Holly does not believe that the girl is going to leave their settlement. It turns out that Hannah is going in search of the master. Holly can't help her, so she leaves the research to the girl knight. They say goodbye, wishing each other good luck. Returning to the main square, the heroes notice that the master has begun actively improving the residential and training area. 3 armory buildings, a blacksmith's workshop, a carpenter's workshop, and a metalworking workshop formed a common structure, an equipment workshop, and the entire area was improved to the 2nd level. Surprised by such a quick transformation, Charlie and Joan do not understand how this is possible. But Peter said that the master only invested money, because in all likelihood he liked the game. Encouraged by the master's gifts, Izzy congratulates the heroes that they are lucky to have a master who has enough money for a set for 65,001. According to the rules of the game, the master is not awarded crystals for winning tasks, and there are very few other ways to earn them within the game. Meeting a player who is ready to invest real money is a great success. Suddenly, an announcement is made about the arrival of 10 new heroes. The gate opens and bright light pours out of it. There are only 2 methods of calling, for in-game gold and advanced calling for crystals. Naturally, the second method is much more effective. Men and women of different ages come out to the square. They are all confused and behave very carefully. Swinging his sword, Peter put it to the old man's throat, loudly telling everyone that now no one would explain anything to them. Their only goal was to survive, and whoever stayed would be told everything. Izzy attracted attention with a furious scream, ordering the carpenters to go to the place indicated to her. Everyone began to be indignant, but she continued to assign the roles of blacksmith, cook, and others. Having armed the first 5, the fairy opened a rift and ordered the heroes to go into battle. Of course, they were all afraid and did not understand everything that was happening. The heroes began to die quickly, which alerted Joan, and she suggested that they should have been instructed more carefully. But Peter pacified her and said that it was pointless, because if they were dying on the first floor, then it was not worth wasting time on them. Afterwards, the names of the second 5 were named, who were also absolutely terrified and did not believe in their strength. Suddenly, Charlie expressed a desire to go to the rescue along with the second group, which surprised many. Peter allowed him to go, because his skills were not far behind the beginners, and he needed to gain more experience. The black-haired guy only managed to give instructions to the young assistant so that he could give the newcomers some experience. When the last new girls left for the rift, Joan began to complain that she missed home and normal food, because here they only feed her potatoes. Peter told the girl that her wishes and words reach the master, but he is highly filtered, of course. He does not hear conversations, but he can respond to requests to change something with action. Soon all 6 returned without losses. Charlie killed only 1 goblin. As promised, he gave the newcomers the opportunity to gain combat experience. The team moved to the living area to finally eat. The heroes saw the updated dining room, which began to look much better. They were happy and were already looking forward to new delicious dishes. Isaac was taken aback to find only potatoes and a lot of spices in the kitchen. When Peter looked at his grandfather's skills, he saw that he did not know how to cook at all, and volunteered to be a cook, apparently because he did not want to fight. All this time he was lying to the team. The guy immediately invited Chloe, a young girl with culinary skills, to become their cook instead of the old liar. Isaac began to quickly get out of the situation, because it was beneficial for him to sit in a peaceful city. So he began to offer to give him a chance to cook something. But Peter strictly refused him and warned him never to lie again. After some time, the whole table was covered with potatoes in different forms. Boiled, stewed, fried, with different spices and shapes. Everything looked incredibly tasty. Over a common dinner, Joan exchanged her experience with the recruits, reassuring them that she herself was just as timid and had poor weapon skills. Peter turned to Chloe and Earl, who were puzzled by the question of what they should do. But they turned out to be the only ones who would not fight, because their help to the team would consist of cooking and producing equipment. Unfortunately, the number of places in the settlement is limited, so if a character appears with better skills than them, Chloe and Earl will be removed from their positions as cook and carpenter and sent into battle. The next day, 3 young guys joined the main battle group. Greg, Hugh, and Duke. Apparently the rest of the heroes were scared and were looking for a place to hide. Charlie had a bad influence on them. Now they called Peter brother. Their difference in characteristics was 7 to 8 points. Like between a child and an adult, on Earth such a sharp increase in strength would be simply impossible. The capable Joan achieved level 5 in archery basics and level 2 in dagger mastery. Alas, Charlie's spear mastery is also level 2, but it doesn't grow any further. He trains more than anyone else but doesn't gain any skills. The trio mastered the first level of sword mastery. Their development was very similar, probably due to the same age, but in any case they were better than those who were hiding in their homes. Soon the master summoned 10 more heroes. This time Charlie and the others managed everything without Peter. During the selection, only 1 person died on the battlefield. There were more. But this is not the end. Joan was worried that the master was not leading them to the 5th floor because a lot of time had passed since the last purge. Peter explained that the 5th floor would have a sharp jump in difficulty, similar to the boss level, where the guy himself is not sure that he can survive, so the master is in no hurry to send the heroes to their deaths. As a result of the call, the master had 6 1-star combat heroes: Joan, Peter, Charlie, Greg, Hugh, and Duke. Support heroes also included one-star characters: Earl, a carpenter, and Chloe, a cook. The next day came and another battle on the 4th floor with goblins and harpies. The team lined up with Greg and Hugh defending in front with shields, Duke with a spear right behind them, and Peter and Joan belaying them behind them. Thanks to teamwork, the weaker ones will be able to improve. Instead of personal dominance, use a combination of everyone's strengths. Peter was not going to participate in the battle. Then they simply would not have been able to gain experience in teamwork, because the guy could easily clear the entire floor alone. The group successfully cleared the floor, and the satisfied trio happily exited the gate. But Master Leo knew that there was a task on the 5th floor that he could not handle alone, so they would have to prepare for anything. Joan was pleased with the new arrivals and praised them for their efforts. Peter agreed with her. From the second pack of 10 heroes, the master pulled out a blacksmith, a tanner, and a carpenter. They began to work in the workshop to create equipment, mostly low-rank swords and shields, which were given to newcomers, and the main group received high-quality equipment. 3 useless heroes were sent to synthesis. They never came to training and said that they would run away at the first opportunity. Among them was Isaac, who lied about his ability to cook. A few days later, Peter suggested that today they could go up to the 5th floor, to which Izzy confirmed his guesses. The young man warned that this would not be an ordinary clearing of the floor, so that the group would not tense up yet, but also not relax too much. Everyone except Duke was moved to the destroyed city, which was in terrible condition, completely lifeless. Fires were burning somewhere. Everyone was wary, because the monsters were nowhere to be seen. But the leader, Peter, ordered the heroes to line up in order to reach the city center. The group walked through a completely empty city. There were traces of dried blood everywhere. This place was completely different from their usual battlefield. The leader ordered the red-haired girl to climb a high tower to inspect the area. Joan carefully examined the whole city, but then, in the distance, she saw something terrible that she could not believe. This was a huge horde of goblins. There were thousands of them. There was no end in sight to this terrible wave. It turned out that they had to survive and not clear the floor. Peter explained that they would need to survive a certain amount of time without dying, and only then would they be able to complete the task. Hugh suggested they just hide, but all the doors were blocked and they had to leave here. Charlie asked how long they would have to fight, to which Peter calmly replied that only 10 minutes after they encountered the enemies. Raising his head, Peter saw a timer for a full 30 minutes, which was terrible. Such a chance appears with a 9% probability, but they were clearly out of luck. The heroes had to choose the first alley they came across. It had small passages, so the monsters would not be able to break through in a wide line, which would greatly facilitate the flow of the battle. The team leader ordered Charlie to hold the right passage, Greg and Hugh to cover the rear. He himself stood up to protect the left passage, warning that they would fight in bursts, using every minute wisely. Joan needed to stay in the center, shoot only at Peter's command and try to conserve her arrows. Suddenly, the first goblin runs out from around the corner, and the timer starts counting down. The goblin attacks Peter, who has not yet managed to build barricades, breaking everything in his path. The terrible roar and stomping of thousands of bloodthirsty monsters forces the team to prepare for a terrible battle. At the same moment, the team leader comes up with the idea of making barricades from the corpses of creatures, and he tells everyone about this, to which the heroes obediently agree. Peter's tactics were simple. Block and strike, he quickly and clearly killed the nasty goblins one after another. Frightened, Charlie clarifies whether they really need to fight for 10 minutes, to which the black-haired guy answers in the affirmative, so as not to worry the team again. Monsters with burning eyes and a hungry grin occupy the entire passage with their bodies. There are so many of them that they have to climb over each other's heads just to get to the heroes. The fight continued fiercely, and Peter ordered Greg to switch with Hugh, but the guy said that he still had strength. The leader sharply told him to shut up and follow the command. Greg's problem was not only his level and poor technique, but also that he was overexcited and spent too much effort. One blow was enough to kill a goblin. There were some of them on the first floor, so it wasn't difficult if you followed the tactics. Hit, block, and hit again. But there were too many of them too. Peter again ordered the guys to change. He gave them the weakest point, which is understandable because they are still inexperienced fighters. Next, ordering Joan to help Greg, he asked to try to take the arrows that she would use. The fighting girl was already waiting for her exit and began to boldly kill the creatures that break through their defenses. Already tired, Charlie shouts to Peter that the fight should only last 10 minutes, but it seems to him that more has passed. The leader answers him with the phrase that only 5 minutes have passed and that he should not relax. Goblins attack the group in an endless stream, and at some point one of them gets too close and tears off Greg's arm. He screams in horror, in pain and shock. blood gushing out of his shoulder like a river. Peter, like a real fighter, calmly orders Hugh to replace his wounded comrade, not paying attention to him, because there is no time for this. Due to the terrible pain, Greg experiences fear, and his characteristics drop even lower. He cries. An enraged Peter sweeps away the monsters who are already quite tired of him. They climb like parasites. Nothing stops them. Joan approaches the wounded guy and tells him to pull himself together. She bandages the rest of his hand, saying that if he doesn't start fighting, then Hugh will simply be killed. At this point, Hugh warns that his weapon has become dull, and Greg, overpowering himself, gets to his feet to replace it. Of course, this was expected. Although this sword was of good rank, it was still a simple iron weapon that had to be repaired by Hugh urgently. Ruthlessly killing the goblins without stopping, Peter said that even if they didn't have a blade, let them fight with shields. Motivating the heroes to fight further, the leader says that they only have 3 minutes left to hold out in this hell. But inside he was indignant that half an hour lasted so long. Peter ordered Joan to switch positions with Charlie and return to the middle. Hugh also had to relieve the already exhausted Greg, who was fighting with all his might. Immediately, the girl was told to help Hugh with arrows. But seeing that there were literally a few arrows left, Peter ordered not to save arrows. Otherwise, everything would be over if the goblins broke through. Joan enchantingly began firing at every creature that tried to approach the group. Hugh, in turn, finished off goblins wounded by arrows with his sword at close range. Just as Greg wanted to say that he was ready to change, a vile creature pierces him with a sharp blade and lifts him above him. Joan notices that Greg is in the clutches of the enemy and shoots accurately at the goblin, who falls and lets go of the guy. The girl runs up in horror to the young man, who has fallen on the asphalt and is vomiting blood, being on the verge of death. The red-haired beauty looks at her barely breathing comrade. She struggles with doubts about whether to take out or leave the goblin's weapon in her body. Greg only lets out pitiful moans. All dirty and exhausted, Hugh begs Greg to help him at least for half a minute. Hearing this, Peter punches several goblins at once with a powerful blow so that they fall back with a shockwave, pushing the rest away. Having run to the guy, the leader ordered him to move to the left flank, and he himself would sort it out here. A notification appears about Greg's death, saddened by Joan, who was sitting next to his corpse. They are ordered to return to battle again because their former comrade can no longer be helped. Quickly pulling herself together, the girl begins to attack enemies and increases her level of dagger proficiency. Very tired, she asks how soon the meat grinder will end. Peter has to quickly change the subject to the fact that since she has the opportunity to ask about it, she better deal with the goblins. Suddenly, a cry for help rings out. Hugh falls to the ground, bleeding, and a giant wave of rabid goblins moves towards him. Peter understands that there is no way to help the guy, and he is covered by a crowd of creatures which kill him at the same moment. The leader understands that it is time to retreat and entails his surviving comrades. Stopping at the wall, Joan is commanded to climb it. Approaching enemies will have to be hit several at a time. Now the one-hit, one-dead tactics were not enough. Meanwhile, Joan climbed up and shouted that she was ready to help them climb. With a deft leap, Peter grabs the handrail at the top of the wall. Charlie grabs the girl's hand, but does not have time to rise, as the goblin inserts a blade into his left leg. The leader has to jump down to kill the enemy who prevented Charlie from climbing. The strong girl had to hold her hanging comrade by the hand all this time. Having gone downstairs, Peter realizes that they do not have time and will have to cut off the wounded leg. With one movement of the sword, he cuts off Charlie's leg, and he howls painfully from terrible torture. Joan is struggling to lift the wounded man upstairs. The black-haired young man is trying to somehow help her. Looking down, the heroes realize that the goblins have begun to climb over each other's heads to get to their victims. Joan and Peter began to fight off the crowd of creatures together. They stabbed them with a spear and sword so that they could not reach them. The heroes were at a dead end. They had nowhere to run. All that remained was to fight for their lives with their last strength. Immediately, the girl's weapon was snatched from her hands and she had to kick the monsters because she had no other weapon. The leader shouted that he only had 30 seconds left to hold on, which was true. But the creatures broke loose and began to madly attack the exhausted team. Climbing onto the wall, one of the goblins suddenly got so close to the guy that he was able to pierce his belly with his sword. With all his might, Peter cut the impudent creature that dared to injure him. At the same moment, the goblins get to the red-haired girl, causing her to bleed. Surrounded by a crowd of enemies, the hero understands that this is the end. That he will die on the fucking 5th floor. He was indignant. Because it turns out that all this torment was wasted time. And it is then that a frantic force awakens in him, which prompts him to go into battle again. A horde of monsters rushes towards him, eager to cut the man into pieces. Primal anger awakens in Peter. His eyes light up with hellish fire, as if he turns into an animal. Approaching, he furiously looks straight into the eyes of death. He is ready to destroy each of them. However, time is running out, and the crowd of enemies begins to evaporate in blue rays. The monster's hand, eager to tear Peter's face to shreds, only manages to scratch him and disappears. A group of heroes is transported into the hall. They defeated the enemies and cleared the 5th floor. Now daily dungeons were available to them. Joan and Charlie at the same moment dropped their weapons and fell exhausted to the floor, and Peter froze with a devastated look. With an awkward laugh, the girl asks the leader to help her get up. She excitedly asks if this will happen every time now. The young man replies that it was a special case. For a well-coordinated group, such tasks are not a problem. Unfortunately, they did not receive them at the most opportune moment. The wounded, exhausted heroes, only the 3 of them, emerge from the rift. Peter helps Charlie walk since he has not fully recovered. The cheerful Duke runs up to meet them, congratulating them on their victory. He asks where Greg and Hugh are, thinking that the guys are still inside. But he is pierced with a shocking answer about their death. The guy is dumbfounded with horror. Suddenly, the master announces a meeting, and the 3 survivors walk across the square past frightened people. As soon as Peter entered the room, he collapsed onto his bed. Now he has 2 abilities. Cold Blood helps to maintain calm in any situation, and Berserk, the complete opposite, exchanging sanity for increasing combat power. The guy still had a lot to learn, but obviously not today. He falls asleep, thinking about tomorrow's affairs. The next day, arriving at the training arena, he saw Joan, who was already training when she was usually still sleeping at this time. Yesterday, she learned a new skill, but Charlie is not even rewarded for his hard work. Peter's current ceiling is the 5th level of skills. Usually, heroes with 3 stars grow at such a speed. He almost died at the maximum 10th level, which indicated an imminent promotion to 2 stars. A red-haired girl approached him, sat down on his level, fascinated by his forms, and began to touch him, which outraged the hero. She admired his stamina, although she herself was on par because she recovered very quickly from yesterday, unlike Charlie, who did not come to training. Other heroes simply pretend that they are busy with something, so as not to go to synthesis, they only run to training when the master is in the game. Suddenly, Charlie appears on the site with a terribly guilty expression on his face, starting to apologize for his weakness because, if not for him, then those 2 could have survived yesterday. But Peter only said that they themselves were to blame for their weakness. A whole month has passed since Peter got into the game. In the real world, about 10 days. He managed to calculate that the difference between the times is 3 times different. And in battle, game and real-time coincide. The guy also noticed that the master enters the game in the morning, afternoon, and evening. His stream of thoughts is interrupted by a proud fairy, who loudly shouts about how great Peter is that he was able to clear the 5th floor, having such mediocrities in the group. Joan approaches the hero with suspicion to find out what he did to Izzy that she is acting so strangely, but the young man does not reveal his secrets. The Guardian angrily scolds the other slackers for not trying to increase their strength and improve their skills. Suddenly, an invitation appears for Peter, Joan, and 3 other heroes to go through the rift. At the gates with daily quests, which are now open for completion, various hints appear, as well as the time until the change to the next location. One of the group anxiously asks if they will have to fight. The leader contemptuously tells him not to worry. The group entered the Kendert Forest, a daily dungeon where they must collect materials and return back after time runs out. Wary Joan, not seeing any enemies, was worried that this could again be a special task. But Peter reassures her that here, you only need to collect all kinds of resources. A portal appeared next to the guys. The leader immediately explained to the team that this was a storage facility where they would need to dump all the collected materials, which would later become new items. He ordered the 3 to stay and collect useful resources, while he and the red-haired girl went hunting. An unusual deer was calmly grazing on an emerald-colored forest edge. Joan's eyes instantly lit up, because she desperately wanted to finally eat meat and not choke on just potatoes. Immediately, an arrow accurately pierces the animal's neck. It wriggles in terrible pain and roars. As soon as the creature falls to the ground, the girl runs up and joyfully begins to cut up the carcass. She masterfully performs this vile action. Peter tells her to stay here and finish the dismemberment, and he goes on his way. There was only half an hour left in this beautiful oasis of endless resources. Therefore, he hastened to find new prey for dinner in the settlement. At a watering hole, he notices a rare monster, the Queen of the Forest. Her distinctive feature is a large golden horn on her forehead. Thanks to such creatures, the heroes receive material for promoting the hero. A low-rank attribute stone. In an instant, he cuts down the forest deer standing nearby, sparing not a single one. and before him stands the majestic, enraged queen of the forest, who has already prepared to take revenge. After some time, in the initial location of the forest, the frightened heroes who remained to collect materials saw a monster. Behind the leaves of the trees in the shadows peeked the fiery eye of a monster, ready to devour them. Literally a few moments later, Peter comes out from there, carrying a defeated monster with a golden horn on his shoulder. He throws the deer's head on the ground and asks the girl to help him with it. While Joan was putting everything away in storage, she said that she had already killed 2 deer and 1 wild boar. She asked what the most disgusting tasting part of a deer's body, the head, was needed for. It turned out that Peter only needed the horn, which, unfortunately, could not be pulled out of it. Happy Joan began to skillfully cut out the precious horn from her head, thereby gaining the forest hunter skill. Peter found himself in the hands of a low-ranking stone of the wind attribute, filled with the energy of the forest. It will need to be used to create items and increase the rank of heroes. Returning home, they were greeted by a table completely covered with various meat dishes, which they all missed terribly. Joan approached Peter after dinner with the good news that everyone had eaten a whole deer, after which the guy invited her to the dungeons with him. Daily dungeons change every 2 days. Monday, Tuesday is the Izrolt mine. Wednesday, Thursday, the Kendert forest. On Friday and Saturday, the Sinmeal Plateau is accessible, but only on Sunday is access to all locations available at once. Today, the Sinmeal Plateau was accessible, where only Peter and Joan went this time. The breathtaking view from the top captured the girl's spirit. She looked into the distance with delight. Peter noticed the flowers of life. They are very useful, since they are the basis for a health potion. He planned to collect them, but a huge monster suddenly attacked them. The team immediately reacted to it, and together they began to fight the wolf in a coordinated manner. Their united work helped to quickly and easily knock down the huge carcass of the beast. Joan immediately began to tear open the wolf, because there was very little time before the others smelled the blood. In his hands, Peter was already holding a low-rank stone of the water attribute, filled with the energy of the plateau, which had the same properties as the previous one. Happy Joan liked it when they just hunted and gathered. She wanted it to always be that way. Peter thought that this would be a real paradise if it were not for the master. And then he realized that he himself was the same player. He was overcome with horror that the inhabitants of Nilfgaard could think the same about Leo. Peter suggested that she do this instead of fighting. The girl would gladly agree. But she understood that everything depended on the situation in the settlement. She asked him why he was offering her this if he himself was not going to leave the front line, which surprised Peter. He clearly did not expect such directness and did not know what to answer. A few days later, the fighting trio went to the 6th floor. This time they were joined by young Duke. The heroes had to go on reconnaissance and explore an unfamiliar location. Charlie became worried because he didn't see any enemies nearby. He was shut up by Peter, who ordered him not to make noise, apparently noticing something. Walking a little further, the group saw 3 goblins sitting calmly in a clearing. Noticing one of them had a horn on his belt, it became clear that help was somewhere nearby. Climbing a tree, Joan carefully examined the area and saw a settlement of goblins, of which there were about 100. Peter realized that it was a trap if they carelessly went into battle with the monsters. The guys came up with a plan to carefully get rid of the enemies that were bothering them. Duke was given a simple task to begin with. He needed to cover his comrades if something went wrong. The battle began with a well-aimed hit by an arrow in the goblin's head from Joan. Immediately, one of the monsters grabbed his horn and tried to call for reinforcements. Peter, with a deft movement of his sword, immediately cut off the attempt to call for help along with the goblin's head. Having quickly dealt with the 3 creatures, the heroes disappointedly began to become covered in blue flames to be transported to the settlement. However, their leader with a sharp jump left the circle and ran somewhere into the distance. He knew that somewhere here there must be a clue about the next stage, because reconnaissance missions can help find out information about what will happen in the future. Having reached the habitat of the monsters, he saw how more advanced goblins were holding raging wolves in chains. Hiding behind the fence, he looked at the village of creatures but did not understand how big it was. It was at that moment that he was transported into the hall. Joan asked the young man where he had run away so suddenly. He only calmly replied that he was looking around. But in his head, he analyzed what was happening, realizing that it depended only on the master's attention whether he would understand these clues during reconnaissance or not. Coming out to the square, a frightened Chloe immediately runs up to him, who tells him that some strangers, unlike the others, came. They were with weapons. Peter immediately realized that the new heroes were not simple, but high-ranking and very dangerous. A charmed Izzy flies up to the guy and shares with him the information that the master, it turns out, bought the beginner's set for 50,000 won. The young man reassured Chloe that they would not do anything to her. They were just a little special and told her to return to the kitchen. A group of heroes saw a sultry black-haired beauty leaning against the wall of a building. Joan immediately came running to her, eager to meet the new, clearly strong person. The frightened girl introduced herself as Emma, and Joan, in turn, introduced her to the seemingly indifferent, but actually kind Peter. Emma turned out to be a 3-star thief-class hero, who had little strength and health, but she was not lacking in dexterity. Peter immediately invited the girl to talk to the dining room to find out if she remembered anything, but, unfortunately, the beauty only knew that she was sent here for battles and only a little about synthesis, and when she tried to remember more, her head started to be furiously sick. Having difficulty remembering, she told how she was part of the Wolves of Destruction group, how she was at work in Halsya, and then woke up here. Outside the window, Izzy's menacing voice rang out, calling the heroes to the square. A huge man walked out of the dining room, brazenly taking with him a whole deer shin. Chloe immediately worried that this would be enough for 5, but now no one except the arrogant new guy will get it. A terrifying group of 5 strong recruits stood awaiting instructions in front of the gate. Their leader is a long-haired guy with a cold look named Adam, a big thug, Bruce, a blue-haired young man, Bobby, Woody, scary as death, and Emma, already known to the heroes. People began to turn to Peter in panic, saying that something was wrong with the new people. They had the feeling that they were bad people. The new group entered the rift, and Joan and Peter began to discuss them. It seemed to the girl that Emma was the only normal one among all these heroes. They were interrupted by the voice of a guy who was annoyingly pestering them, begging for protection from the scary new guys. None of them even came close to Duke's strength. They just pretended in front of the master, and then ate the meat that Joan brought. They had a lot of time to master some kind of craft and begin to be useful, but the only thing they thought about was how to avoid synthesis. With chillingly cold eyes, Peter looked at them and furiously drove the impudent loafers away. Charlie, who began to feel sorry for them, was boldly interrupted by Peter, who reminded him that while he was bleeding out surrounded by goblins, these little people were simply eating and sleeping in comfort. Duke approaches the group with a completely broken face. It turned out that he was in a duel, where he managed to get such a tasty treat. The time had come for the scary group to return from the mission. They were clearly disappointed by the ease of the mission. Sitting on their way was Peter, who, when asked by Adam who he was, brazenly replied that it was none of his business. The giant Bruce began to attack him, but Joan stood up in defense, after which Bobby attacked her with claims. Adam decided to introduce himself to the mysterious stranger and tell him that he was the captain of this detachment, and Peter only coldly called his name, saying that he was an ordinary farmer. Adam asked if all the local residents were gathering in the square when the conscription began. The guy answered in the affirmative. At this moment, the master began summoning 10 simple heroes along with the synthesis. Izzy was shocked by the newly arrived mediocrities, and in such numbers. Immediately calling several names, she sent the frightened newcomers into the synthesis room. Stunned, Joan could not believe that the master would do this to newly arrived heroes. Terrible. Bruce began looking for the heroes Izzy had just named. Forcibly taking 2 people by the scruff of the neck, he dragged them along the ground all the way to the synthesis hall. People began to run away in panic, and Adam, Bobby, and Woody took out their weapons to catch them like sheep, because they were needed for their synthesis. Peter asked the fairy to give the master advice that it is better not to merge the heroes without any reason. Bruce, who had recently left the hall, approached the farmer with a claim that he should not interfere with them. But the guy decided to run into trouble, answering him rudely. The enraged man instantly raised his axe at Peter to point to his place. His blow was interrupted by an arrow fired by Joan, flying right in front of his face. Adam had already turned to the guys with hostility. Emma, who was trying to stop him, received a strong blow to the stomach from him. Sticking his long sword in front of Peter's head, Adam threatened him with violence, but the guy, calling them trash, finally angered the team. The Guardian bursts into the tense situation with an exclamation that the heroes cannot fight among themselves, because the master can punish them for this. But it was too late, because both sides were ready to tear each other apart. Peter guessed that in front of him was an ordinary gang of bandits. Such an attack in their direction greatly offended Adam, who at first was patient with the guy, but now clearly wanted to kill him. Peter turns to Izzy with the words that such heroes will only get in the way, causing chaos in the settlement and reducing overall efficiency. Thereby, they are ballast that needs to be gotten rid of. It was after these words that a seemingly ordinary farmer challenges a hero with 3 stars to a duel. Peter explains that he knows people like him very well. At first, he asked if all the residents were in the square in order to understand whether there might be someone strong in the settlement. And when they realized that there were no strong ones, they completely lost fear and used the newcomers who were only that they called. Joan, shocked by this behavior, did not understand what was happening. Peter said that everything was simple. He wins. They absorb Adam in the synthesis, and if the other wins, they absorb him. The girl was ordered to take people from the battlefield to a residential area for safety. The duelists agreed that the end of the battle is not death, but a request for mercy, since the loser is needed alive for synthesis. With a powerful jerk, Adam runs at Peter, swinging his sword. However, the hero, who had been standing until now without even taking out a weapon, suddenly goes into berserk mode. A second before the blow, the furious Peter slides behind his enemy, leaving a trail of burning eyes. With one blow, he crushes his face on the paving stones. It becomes covered in blood, and some of his teeth simply fall out. Mockingly, he orders Adam to surrender, and he barely grunts and utters a phrase that should stop the duel. Forcing the defeated guy to specifically say this again, he says that he is not going to lag behind him, because the wolves of destruction were not going to lag behind those people. He greedily grabs the poor man's face, sending the team who are worried about Adam away. Angered by such rudeness, Woody is already preparing to punish the bastard for his words and actions. Suddenly, Peter switches to Emma, offering to leave the team of stupid bandits for his group. The girl was stunned by such an unexpected proposal. At that moment, Bruce began to yell at her with all his might so that she should not dare to do this. In the meantime, Peter's attention was diverted. Adam tried to reach his weapon with his hand, but an attentive farmer cruelly prevents Adam's attempt at sabotage by hitting the ground. During this time, Emma managed to make a decision and left the pile of garbage, joining Peter. Thus, she completely pisses off the trio. Adam once again tries to say that he is giving up, but Peter interrupts him with a blow and the phrase, "Does he really want to die in synthesis?" This becomes the last straw, and the group takes off, planning to destroy the vile farmer. The formidable Izzy blocks their path, warning them not to interfere in the duel. Of course, there was no stopping them, and they demanded that the little one get out of their way. This is exactly what Peter was waiting for. The fairy suddenly turned from cute into a bloody monster, ready to kill the bastards. With one powerful blow, she tears three three-star heroes to shreds at once. Adam immediately turns to Leo with the fact that he followed all the instructions, which deserves his praise. He utters the long-awaited phrase and Leo instantly comes out of berserk mode. The master, in a panic, presses the screen many times because he clearly did not expect such an outcome of events. During the synthesis process, Peter receives an increase in the skills Sword and Shield Technique, Basics, and Pain Threshold. He has now reached the maximum level and needs a rank increase. It was a pity for the wasted calls. Even though they were ballast, there were more problems. And now the master was probably beside himself with rage. The hero looks at the master, thinking about his further actions. He hopes that the master will pull himself together. Otherwise, he will never climb to the top of the tower. Peter goes to the dining room where all the residents have gathered. And as soon as he enters, a flurry of delight and admiration falls on him. He pulls the cheek of the talkative Joan, who told everyone about what happened, although she should have kept her mouth shut. Each of the people sincerely thanks for their salvation from these terrible villains. One of them says that now the guys will invest and try their best, but Peter says that this is unnecessary. After all, now the master is very angry. Suddenly, everyone hears several names being pronounced, and a terrible smile appears on the guy's face. Excited Joan does not understand why they should call the heroes now, but after Peter's hint, she was taken aback, because it became clear that they were going to synthesis. A dissatisfied guy came forward who disagreed with the master's decision and Peter's words. In order to pacify the mediocre, lazy person, he kicks him in the jaw. The already evil guardian flies into the dining room to gather the naughty heroes. The girl is interested in who they will all go with, and Peter assumes that they will go with the new Emma, because her level is still low. After completing the synthesis, Emma comes out with a level increase and the acquisition of the disarming traps skill. With a murderous look, Peter turns to all the heroes, warning them not to even think about sitting on their necks, because no one is going to protect them. And if they want to survive, then let them prove it. There is fear in their eyes because some do not know how to fight at all and are afraid that they will simply be synthesized. Peter continued, "If someone wants to take up one of the types of crafts, then they should turn to the craftsman and the cook. If the heroes think they can handle it in close combat, then Peter tells them to come to him. Heroes who want to learn how to hunt should go to Joan, and Earl teaches carpentry. After this, Joan runs up to the leader, talking about his kindness, because he told the rest of the residents everything in detail. She was right. because if they listen to the leader, they can avoid a stupid death. They were approaching the 10th floor and they needed a second group, but not just a bunch of people, but one capable of supervising the main one. Visiting Chloe in the dining room the next morning, Peter saw that she had an assistant and now they knew how to bake bread. It turned out that the skillful new cook ground the potatoes into flour and baked excellent, tasty bread. Afterwards, the hero came to pick up Emma, and they went to the training arena together. Having met Joan on the field, he ordered the girls to spar with daggers. Armed, the girls began to fight. Joan was the first to attack the confused Emma. However, she quickly gathered herself, and they began to rush around the arena, raising dust that hid their quick attacks. At some point, Emma falls to the ground and wonders with surprise whether the red-haired winner was previously a mercenary or a warrior, but finds out that she is the daughter of a simple hunter. Joan shares with her partner that she started out quite weak, but hard training has greatly increased her strength. Peter says that everything depends on her efforts, so she needs to try, even if she is a 3-star hero. Looking around, the hero noticed that there were more people on the training field after yesterday's performance with Synthesis. Although this is not a matter of personal choice, they will have to increase their own importance in order to survive. However, given all the positions occupied, there are still 2 places left for Synthesis. The black-haired young man notices how one of the guys is training very hard and approaches him. Having met a young man named Jerry, he learns that he used to be a porter for mercenaries and planned to become a real mercenary in the future. Peter was satisfied with this answer, and he invited Jerry to test his strength in a battle with him. That same evening, the screening of newcomers began, and although Charlie constantly participated in battles, he was not chosen for promotion. 2 people died at the Synthesis, thanks to whom Jerry rose to the 3rd level. The rest were sent to daily dungeons, and the mine, from which fire attribute stone can be obtained, was still closed. At dawn, Peter decided to gather the 5 best fighting heroes, who were clearly not happy about getting up so early. The leader asked if they could guess why they came, but only Duke could answer this question. He understood that they would now choose members of the group. The guy prepared colored sticks for the draw in advance. Holding out the glass, he commanded that they need to split into 2 groups of 3. In the first, Peter became the leader, and Emma was appointed the second. Joan, of course, began to emerge because she thought that she would become an excellent leader. The young man explained that it was dangerous to focus on the growth of just one group, citing the example of an incident on the 5th floor that could lead to the death of all valuable players, thereby conveying the value of dividing into groups. Of course, if all the floors could be cleared by one person, then there would be no point in dividing into groups. But soon the number of people needed for clearing will begin to grow, including on special missions where dozens or hundreds of heroes can participate simultaneously. Peter showed stripes of 2 colors, which meant that the red ones would stay with him, and the blue ones would go to Emma's group. Charlie and Joan got red marks. They happily accepted this outcome, because they will be together with the trusted Peter. Duke and Jerry were a little disappointed in their luck, since Emma was a stranger to them from the point of view of a leader and comrade. The red leader playfully hinted that the second team would have to try to catch up with them if they did not want to be left behind. Emma looked Peter firmly in the eyes and confidently said that she was not going to lose. The next day, Peter, Joan, and Charlie went to clear the 7th floor. Their leader asked not to interfere, as he wanted to try to cope with the goblins alone. He immediately goes into berserk mode. His strength increases, his eyes light up, and he begins to fight. With quick, strong movements, he destroys his enemies one by one, leaving them no chance to live. Having dealt with all the goblins, he returns to his normal state and notices the last monster. Deciding that he will not bother them, he decides to leave him alone. The time for reconnaissance approaches, and Peter notes to himself that it is raining. A river is flowing nearby, and the dam may have been destroyed. The trio successfully crosses the floor and calmly returns back, making plans for the rest of the day. Suddenly, a notification appears about the purchase of the Beginner Double Pack, which contains 5,000 crystals and 100,000 gold. Peter asks Charlie to bring Emma and orders Joan to urgently bring the lot. The master begins 2 high-quality summons for 1,000 crystals. The young man realized that the master turned out to be someone who usually does not buy anything, but cannot stop if he starts. He recalls how he himself was just starting to play Choose Me. Peter understands that new users are attracted by the synthesis system, battles, and observation of living heroes. The characters follow orders and instructions. The master needs to come up with different strategies. With each difficulty level, the content changes, which attracts players. Interrupting the hero's thoughts, a beautiful young girl and a courageous gray knight enter the square. However, the treacherous hem of the dress gets stuck under her foot, and the girl falls to the ground with a crash. Joan, who has returned with the draw, looks at the poor girl and asks what happened here. But the indifferent Peter only tells her not to pay attention to it. Emma notices that this is not an easy girl, but an aristocrat. It turns out that she began to understand people well after being a mercenary. Knight Ronald understood the concept of master, summoning, and synthesis, but was completely unaware of levels and skills. He was the guardian of a big city, and he looks like a completely normal person if you forget about the excessive sense of duty. Peter announced the start of the draw with Emma. Now blue meant the old man, and red the girl. Joan was in such a hurry to see the young man that she accidentally tripped over a pebble on the road. Very fortunately, the farmer notices a red mark on one of the sticks when it jumps out a little due to the shaking of the glass. But when he saw Emma's sly smile, he realized that she too had noticed the mark. As soon as the glass touches the paving stones, both immediately pounce on the left stick with a blue mark. However, an unexpected flame behind them stops the heroes from making a hasty choice. Each of them understands that the girl turned out to be a fire magician and immediately begin to fight for the right red wand. Turning to look at the stunning Elizabeth, Peter sees her mage class and advanced fire magic skill. Shocked by the display of fire magic, Joan looks at the pair of leaders who are desperately holding on to the red wand. Mages are extremely rare and are highly valued. They can only be obtained through donation calls, unlike warriors, thieves, and other classes. Joan guessed that the guys had spied and began to mix the wands again while Peter explained to the disgruntled girl that they were now busy choosing who would get the magician. And then it dawns on Elizabeth that all this time they have been disposing of people as if they were things. Joan placed the toss glass on the ground for the second time and ordered them to play fairly. Peter successfully pulls out the red wand, and Emma's team includes an old guard. Looking back at the screams, the guys saw Izzy trying to drag another weakling into synthesis. Peter explains to Elizabeth that the guy failed to master the cheer skills and now he will have to die. The magician's girl is also invited to synthesis, where she successfully increases her level. The farmer warns that it is impossible to avoid the synthesis if she does not keep up, so he advised her to work hard. Ronald was the next one to go for the synthesis, which subsequently also successfully increased his level. The Guardian Fairy effectively reopened the rift of space and time, inviting the second group to take part in the fourth floor test. Emma kindly invited Ronald to become the main hero of the battle in order to find out his powers. When the team left, Peter decided to ask what kind of magic the girl had. Elizabeth began to resist and appear that she did not want to fight with some strange creatures for no reason. In an already chilling voice, the irritated hero again warns that if she disobeys, she will simply be sent to synthesis and repeats his question. It turned out that the pompous girl only knew fire magic, but she said that she could easily learn support magic. The fiery beauty assured that the guy would be smitten when he saw her abilities, and no support magic could compare with her. The young man was disappointed by this information, but hoped that at least the power of her magic would be high. The joyful heroes returned from the battlefield, more united, and it was clear that they worked well as a team. Now the first group under the command of Peter went into the rift. The leader suggested that they would most likely be sent to the fourth floor, which would be ideal for testing magic. He announced with a smile on his face that they would stand aside while Elizabeth fought to see her strength. Of course, such an unexpected state of affairs scared the girl a little, but she quickly pulled herself together and declared that he would definitely be surprised by what he saw. While closing the rift, sweet Izzy wished the team good luck, but at the end, a little nervousness became visible on her face. As soon as the heroes were transferred to the field, Peter ordered everyone to immediately prepare their weapons, as the master sent them to the 8th floor. It became clear that the master was clearly furious about what had happened earlier, and the synthesis of 1 3-star. Suddenly, the leader notices something and orders him to immediately lie down on the ground. The distracted Elizabeth, who went into battle with the team for the first time, looks in surprise at her lying comrades, when suddenly Peter grabs her and throws her down, realizing that she herself would not lie down. At that second, the first enemy arrow flies over their heads, almost killing the only magician. And a crowd of goblin horsemen, whom Peter saw on reconnaissance, breaks into the group with a terrible roar. Joan, reacting quickly, gets up and begins firing at the creatures. Charlie was ordered to move to the side and attack when the goblins reach them. Just as the leader tries to say something to Elizabeth, he notices something flying towards him. With a quick movement, he raises the shield above his head, thereby deflecting the enemy's arrow. He runs past several monsters, cutting each one in half. At some point, he is attacked by a wolf and Peter commands Charlie to act. With a powerful blow, the young man punches the rider, thereby helping his leader get out of the clutches of the wolf. Peter yells at Elizabeth to start doing magic. The frightened girl replied that she needed a minute so that later she could use magic. The leader had no choice but to continue the battle, relying on the strength of the magician. At this time, the fiery beauty began to cast. Magical spells began to surround her image. Charlie had to block the bolts flying towards Elizabeth. Peter realized that the enemy's priority was to remove the magician. He tried to shout to the magician with a request to hit the incoming shields. But the girl was so focused on magic that she didn't answer him. It turned out that she could not cast on the move, so she was in place all this time. And this is what helped the creatures get as close as possible. A sharp goblin blade rose above the aristocrat's head. Peter, who caught her in time, saved the girl from a fatal blow. He was angry because the girl cast magic completely without protection. The whole team went to run into the forest to change location. The team leader ordered the magician to start casting as soon as they reached them and use magic to bombard the area. Joan notified everyone that the team could enter the previously blocked location. The slow aristocrat had to be thrown into the forest area with a strong kick. At that moment, Peter went into berserk mode for the second time that day. Although he was tired, he had to buy time for Elizabeth. With furious blows, he scattered the horsemen along with the wolves, trying to dodge the fast arrows flying at him. Suddenly, a huge carcass of an armored boar flashed behind the hero, which ran straight at him. Having immediately attacked the guy in the back, the wounded Peter comes out of berserk mode. A goblin on a beast knocks him to the ground and is already starting to raise his spear to finish him off. In a cunning way, the young man turns under them and plunges his sword straight into the mouth of a huge wolf. He has to quickly get up and continue fighting again with many monsters around him. Elizabeth finally finishes her preparations and Joan screams at Peter to run to them. Immediately, with the last of his strength, the hero skillfully throws most of the creatures away from him. With a decisive push, he reaches the border of the forest, and in the air above him several enemies are ready to tear apart. At this moment, a fiery hurricane emanating from Elizabeth sweeps across the entire field. The flame consumes everything in its path. Monsters instantly turn into ashes in a huge burning stream. Joan and Charlie, struck by the power of magic, froze in place, looking at the fiery carnage. Peter ordered them to help with the remaining creatures in order to quickly end the battle. The fierce battle continued. Peter was at the limit of his capabilities. Joan, without further hesitation, rushed to the aid of their leader, shooting right in the enemy's head, which saved the guy. Daring Charlie quickly pierced the creature attacking Peter. The trio together dealt with the annoying horde, which still did not end. At this time, Elizabeth had almost finished casting. There was little left before the powerful magic came out. Joan, seeing that a wave of fire would soon cover the field, began shouting to the guys to run away quickly. Immediately, Peter and Charlie rushed away from the blast wave, and the enemies were still running after them. Literally, a couple of moments later, the fiery explosion that the magician caused began to incinerate the monsters. The commander immediately realized that he could not escape, and immediately grouped himself, covering himself with a shield for protection. And again, tenacious goblin riders jumped out of the wall of flame. But Elizabeth cast the spell again, and the fire began to destroy the creatures with a stronger blow. A powerful hurricane, burning everything in its path, swept across the entire battlefield. The shockwave was so majestic that it almost carried away poor Joan, who barely managed to grab onto a tree. As soon as it ended, Peter saw a huge crater. It was burning, and acrid black smoke was flying into the sky, but all the enemies were destroyed. At this moment, the entire team is moved to the waiting room, as they have successfully completed the task. The young blonde looked in horror at the magician, who had just single-handedly destroyed more than 20 goblin riders at once, and Joan admired the girl's skill. Elizabeth proudly reminded them that she had promised to surprise them, and then announced that she had the soul of the Rivel Witch. After these words, blood gushed out of her nose like a river, and she fell unconscious. Peter looked at this creature and drew conclusions based on her fight. It turned out that she could not use any magic for a minute while casting, which is why she would have to be protected. The girl does not have access to support magic, and her strength, endurance, and agility are at the level of a 1-star character. But the leader has never met such a powerful magician. A group of heroes, satisfied with their victory, emerged from the rift, helping the exhausted magician reach his resting place. The next day, the first thing the master did was erect a magical center, which included 2 laboratories and a library. In the training arena, Peter trained the newly minted magician from the very morning, forcing the capricious person to exercise his endurance. Peter ordered the already tired Elizabeth to speed up, because such training is very necessary for battles with swords and spears, which she will have to dodge in battle. The guy noticed that the clothes she was wearing were much more practical than that long dress, to which the beauty objected, because this dress was her family's custom-made magical clothing, which increases the power of fire. The leader gave the already exhausted aristocrat one more task for every day, to run 3 laps without weight at low speed, which was considered very easy. But the girl herself clearly had a different opinion. Peter knew they were very lucky to have the magician when they got so close to the 10th floor. Thanks to the mines of Israel, which opened yesterday, the heroes managed to loot all the materials from 3 weekly dungeons, and it was time to craft potions. The young man asked Joan to keep an eye on the aristocrat so that she did not run away from training, and he himself went to the Hall of Magic. Making potions is usually done by high-level pharmacists or alchemists, but Peter himself had already easily completed the equipment crafting minigame, so he was confident that he could handle this too. There were many books there that, unfortunately, he could not read. The team leader decided to try to create potions without them. The rhythm game was once again easy, and he mastered it masterfully. Having achieved great success, the black-haired man created 6 healing potions and 2 magic ones. That evening, the commander gathered Joan and Charlie in one of the empty living rooms. The guy said that there was now a fire mage in their group and pointed to the brazier next to them. At that moment, he abruptly thrust his hands into the burning coals and ordered the guys to watch his action. Peter explained that because Elizabeth uses flame, the team must get used to it. His comrades looked at this torture with horror, but he only counted, leaving his hand in the brazier. Having reached 10 seconds, the leader took out his completely burned hand. The burn immediately began to disappear and the skin began to heal. Peter calmly conveyed to the guys his idea that the heroes would have to fight next to fire magic. But if you don't get used to it, you can burn alive, so they need to gain the skill of resistance to fire. Joan exclaimed in horror if they would have to repeat after him and put their hand in the coals. The blonde, with fear in his eyes, began to reach out his hand to the burning flame. Peter immediately stopped the young man and said that he did not want to listen and watch people screaming in agony, so he would have to practice in solitude. Joan stated that she did not want to engage in such madness, but Peter decided to help her a little, grabbing her hand for cooking, reassuring her that it would not hurt. The leader began to explain that due to the fact that Elizabeth cannot use shields or teleportation magic, they themselves need to protect her, so they must get used to fire in order to be able to save the only magician from death. Joan clearly understood the lesson. The commander quickly let go of her and took the dagger, leaning his hand against the wall. He pierced her with the blade, saying with a crazy smile that Charlie would have to learn another skill: resistance to pain. He allowed the use of any method suitable to him that would allow him to endure and withstand the pain. Healing potions can heal wounds, but in return comes terrible pain, so the resistance skill will be necessary for the heroes. Joan did not yet need to acquire this skill. Now it was more important for her to acquire the ability to switch from a dagger to arrows, which she should use at any time, at different distances. The leader announced that the team would no longer resort to melee, ranged, and mid-range formations. From now on, they would use a triangular formation with a mage in the center. Peter warned that the girl would also have to join the magician's defense. This is reminiscent of protecting the princess, however. In order to use Elizabeth to the maximum, there are no other options. It is more effective to have 2 magicians, one of whom possessed support magic, but they do not have it. Peter left his comrades and went to his room, thinking about the upcoming 9th floor. Most likely they would send a second group so that they could gain more experience. He knew that there was a mission on the 10th floor that involved at least 2 groups, since this was a joint mission and the level of danger was inconsistent with what the heroes had seen before. The leader prepared the brazier, placed a bucket of water nearby and lit the fire. His hard training began, thanks to which he was able to obtain the fire resistance skill. Afterwards, Peter decided to return to the training arena, where he directly told Elizabeth that she was now useless. So if she reduced the attack power, she would need to speed up the casting of spells and reduce the mana consumption. Now offended, the magician walked with an angry gait into the magic hall for training. She possessed the 3rd class of magic, where the first is ignition, the second is flaming flame, and the third is directed explosions and their variations. The higher the class, the more mana is spent. Although her magic was strong, but the burn rate needs to be increased for effective use. Peter invited Joan to train together, and during their battle he thought about their approach to the 10th floor, which would make their training more difficult. Usually in sparring, arrows simply fly at him. But now he threw away the shield and added additional conditions. The capable Joan has learned to use switching and obtain the skills of basic fencing and basic swordsmanship. Her potential is very great, and her learning speed is generally abnormal. Thanks to rigorous training, the guy acquired the skill protection from projectiles. Charlie could be called a typical 1-star. He wielded a spear at the 3rd level, which was his ceiling. The young man did not appear in training for some time, locking himself in a room and trying to master immunity to pain. Elizabeth, as she was told, trained at a special training ground in the magic hall. Even holding back, she was strong. In the corner of the training hall, some random 1-stars are puffing up, but there are no useful ones among them. There was a possibility that some of them would be added to the groups because there were no more calls, and the teams needed to be assembled. The next day, Emma's group returned after completing the 9th floor. The team was exhausted. Peter found out from the commander of the second group what the difficulty was, and it turned out that they needed to subdue about 50 goblins. She said that she could only notice that the soil was muddy, as if it had been raining for a long time. Of course, there was little information. It was the turn of the first group to go fight, and they quickly managed it thanks to the magician. Apparently, they can no longer use the 4th floor for training. Now the leader is level 10, Joan is level 8, Charlie is on the 6th, and Elizabeth is on the 4th. The heroes have climbed as much as the number of floors allows them at the moment. The way equipment production works is that the group's equipment has been upgraded from leather to iron, and Charlie now has daggers. 2 of the guys training on the site joined the 1st and 2nd groups. Although they are far behind, nothing can be done. After a while, Peter, sitting at the table and drawing up a battle plan, was overtaken by Izzy, who curiously asked if he knew what was waiting for the team on the 10th floor. The young man recalled that, being the master of Leo's masters, the rise to the 88th floor took him 2 years. Dozens of groups were destroyed due to the unpredictability of the game elements and traps. The guy understood that his death would be a failure for the heroes and the anything master. After a while, both teams were gathered on the square, but the master was in no hurry, deciding to send them to the difficult floor or wait a little longer. Peter hoped that if they were left for another week to improve, especially when there are newcomers to the teams, then they would easily pass the 10th floor. However, the master decided to do his own thing and send the heroes into battle. Izzy, as always, skillfully opened the rift, inviting both teams inside. The leader warned the new blonde guy to hide somewhere while they fight because his skills are completely insufficient for such a difficult level. An announcement appeared that the heroes were going on an important mission that required the participation of 2 groups, and advice also appeared that in tasks where tactical stations are used, the player can assign tactical tasks to the participating characters. Peter immediately realized that the master had no idea what to do next and ordered Izzy to send him advice that he needed to get things from the storage that could help in battle. The guy distributed 6 healing potions into 2 groups. Elizabeth had her own separate magic potions. The commander-in-chief warned Emma that they would most likely be divided into different locations, so they would need to group in such a way as to move towards the center. After these words, the entire team was moved to the floor. The guys immediately saw a poor man, struggling in panic, who was sitting on the road. It turned out that he does not see or hear them, but the heroes can touch him, and they feel the touches of the NPCs. The leader told the others that there are many cases when non-player characters appear on missions, although interaction with them lags. But that's how it's done. Having looked around the city, it seemed familiar to Peter. The guys also felt that they had been here before and were right, because this is the same city from the 5th floor, but not yet destroyed. Joan was confused because the time frame seemed very strange to her, but the black-haired young man said that this was not the only anomaly and they should focus on something else. The leader ordered the group to reconnoiter the area in 5 minutes, since they were clearly given time until the battle itself. The leader climbed the highest tower to view all the useful information from it. In the northern forest, there were thousands of goblins. Assault ladders were visible. Fortunately, there were no battering rams anywhere. In the east, there was a river, which they met on the 7th floor, and again many enemies without siege mechanisms. The human forces gathered outside the castle were less than half of the enemies. Rather, their ratio was 10 to 1, if not more. Obviously, a worse scenario could not be imagined. Given the task of surviving for a certain time, they will pass this floor with greater ease than they did the 5th floor. There were a lot of NPCs here who can be used as bait. They also have a magician focused on defending the territory. Suddenly, a triple alert sounded, indicating the highest difficulty. It turned out that this mission was not for survival, but for defense. Combining the first group with the second, we get only 10 people. Taking into account 350 NPCs, there are about 360 soldiers who must withstand thousands of goblins. The heroes began to share their findings. The first to start was Joan, who unsuccessfully tried to talk to the residents who had not even heard her. Charlie told about refugees heading to the city center, goblins approaching from the northern and eastern gates. There were no exits in the south and west, as well as no escape routes, respectively. The mission of the heroes was to, while defending the city, Prevent the enemy from breaking through the gates, in other words, to destroy the opponents. Ronald shared the idea of retreat, because after leaving the city, they would be able to monitor the situation and carry out partisan raids, to which Peter firmly refused. Their leader suspected that the conditions for successful completion of the mission were to destroy the invading army, otherwise they would fail. Suddenly, someone shouted to him to turn around towards the tower because the statue next to it began to glow. Twin Goddesses is an item that appears from time to time on special missions. If this statue is destroyed, then all the heroes will instantly die, regardless of whether they kill the goblins or not. A plan was needed because there were many goblins, but the only siege devices they had were ladders, and only the army in the north, which meant that if the groups were careful, they could buy enough time. Having made a decision, Peter ordered Emma's group to go to the northern wall and help the soldiers, doing everything possible to destroy the ladders that would cling to the walls of the castle. The girl was excited by the fact that there would be only 5 of them, because such an increase to the existing 300 would make it possible to protect the city. The leader understood why she was thinking in this way, but if you count the forces of the second group, then there will be about 50 soldiers. While the goblins have no other equipment other than assault ladders, they only need to hold their positions on the walls in the most dangerous place, thanks to which the effectiveness of the defense will increase significantly. If both groups fight together, the result will be the same. Yes, they will be able to hold out a little longer, but in the end, the goblins will still break through. The numerical difference is too great. Peter reminded the guys that a river flows in the east, and perhaps there is a clue to the solution. On the 7th floor, the rain was pouring down like buckets, and the dam had also broken. All the clues from the 5th to 9th floors pointed to the dam. The question was how it was connected with the goblins. Suddenly, Joan shouts out that she remembered that she heard a horse galloping near the river on the 7th floor. The young man began to pull her cheek, scolding her for not telling her about it sooner. But the reason she didn't do it sooner was because she wasn't sure what she heard. The leader ordered Emma to let her group gain as much time as possible. If the outer wall falls, they should move to the inner one and, if necessary, use soldiers and refugees as bait. No matter how hard it is for them, they must hold out until the first group returns. The guy ordered his team to take weapons and go to the eastern gate to leave the city. If the sound Joan heard was from reinforcements, then the reason the city fell on the 5th floor was because the reinforcements were simply unable to cross the riverbed due to the dam breaking. The second team needed to go to the eastern bank and kill the goblins, and the first group had to protect the dam from breaking. A crowd of refugees moved into the inner walls. The heroes barely squeezed through among these people. But this is only the beginning, because the real problem awaited them ahead. They ran up to the gate that led outside. Joan had to climb to the top and reconnoiter the situation, and Charlie prepared to open the gate. Elizabeth needed to start casting spells, because when the gate opened, she would have to attack the goblins with fire. As soon as the blonde began to pull the mechanism to open the gate, the soldiers instantly blew themselves up to stop the invisible evil spirits. The girl conveyed information from above that a lot of goblins had gathered on the other side, and if you opened the gate, they could simply trample them. It didn't matter anymore. Elizabeth's magic was almost ready to attack, and the gate was about to open. The moment a small gap appeared, the enemy's first arrow flew through it. Peter, of course, managed to stop her, protecting the magician. Joan had to deal with the soldiers who were preventing her from opening the gate. The rain that began to start raised doubts in the leader about the power of fire magic in such weather conditions. The time had come for Elizabeth, whose magic was already at the ready, and the goblins were eager to destroy her. Instantly, all the nasty monsters were incinerated by the terrible power of fire. The flames burst through the outer gate, destroying everyone nearby. The magician needed to drink a magic potion every time after using magic to replenish the spent mana. Suddenly, the young man saw a scared newbie who couldn't even say a word, scared to death. He sent him to Emma, who would come up with a task for him, and if he survived, he would receive recognition from the leader himself. The soldiers began to close the gates in a hurry. Peter was the last to leave. Now the path to retreat was cut off. All that remained was to go forward. The team got into position. Elizabeth concentrated on the weak firepower, spreading her flames over the maximum area. The rain got heavier and the enemies started to advance. There were 20 seconds left before the spell was cast. Peter deftly deflected the projectiles flying at the magician with his shield. Charlie boldly pierced through the carcasses of the creatures. Joan pierced the skulls of monsters with each well-aimed shot. And when the moment came, the magical flame spread with a powerful blow. The team ran right through the line of fire until the monsters attacked again. Although the heat penetrated through the armor, it was quite tolerable. The only thing was that the fire barricade went out too quickly because of the rain. The bloody battle continued again, and the countdown to a new salvo began. And a few moments later, Elizabeth again mercilessly burned the vile creatures. Peter commanded to press forward, using the flames as a shield, repeating this until they reached the river. At the other end of the enemy horde was the goblin commander-in-chief, who ordered his soldiers to change tactics. The leader of the heroes ordered to advance again after the magician's attack. However, he noticed that the tactics of these pigs had changed. They immediately went on the offensive after using magic. Peter cut the bastards one by one with quick and precise movements of his sword. He saw behind the crowd the leader of the creatures, who was the culprit of the triumph. The freak knew that there was a delay between the magician's attacks, so they did not stop the raids. Then the leader said that they only have one chance. In order not to fail, they need to tear the main goblin into 1,000 small pieces. The horde aggressively moved towards the team. Their target was the magician, whom they were obliged to kill first. While Elizabeth was casting her spell, the heroes fought and actively defended her. And when the magic was ready to break out, the girl released it without hesitation. With a powerful ram, the flame demolished the vile pigs and paved the way straight to their commander-in-chief. One salvo was not enough. Then an explosion sounded, which demolished another batch of bastards. Joan concentrated and shot right in the head of their commander, who instantly fell dead. Exhausted, Elizabeth began to lose consciousness due to fatigue. The leader caught her in time. He understood that although the magic was strong, it was impossible to kill everyone. Due to the loss of their commander, the goblins were apparently afraid to engage the group again and went to the fortress, their original goal. Having already moved a decent distance away, they were of no interest to the goblins, who went to the wall. The team was wildly tired and was catching their breath. Peter explained how to properly use healing potions, and everyone repeated him. It was visible from afar that the northern wall was under siege. The outer wall was still standing, which indicated a clear breakthrough of Emma's group. The heroes approached the dam with the full understanding that this was just the beginning. The persistent goblins began to approach them again. However, this time they brought a great friend, an ogre. Urgently, the leader began to assign roles. The magician, creating a wall to stop the goblins, Charlie, protecting Elizabeth. Peter took on a huge ogre. If he misses even one blow, then he can bear the coffin. The shield will not help in any way against such an unsurpassed force. The hero decided to choose a forward attack, because there were no other options. With its terrible blows, the monster forced the young man to quickly dodge and jump far away. Joan tried to pierce his thick skin with arrows, but all attempts were in vain. The freak doesn't dodge because he doesn't need to. He can only be harmed by hits to his weak spots. While the battle was going on, another ogre appeared behind the wall of fire. Peter tried to find help, but Charlie was up to his neck with goblins, as was Elizabeth. The guy had to take risks again, and he approached the huge monster. Ignoring all the pain, he furiously aimed his sword for a critical hit. With a cruel grin on his face, he hit the weak spot of the now not quite male ogre. Unable to tolerate such a vile step from her opponent, the creature became angry and prepared to destroy everything in its path. With an instant leap, the hero jumped onto the enemy's shoulders and pierced his skull with all his might. And with an additional blow, he finally finishes off the enemy. The giant falls to the fiery earth, subdued by the small man. The second degenerate headed straight for Elizabeth. Joan immediately tried to distract him by shooting him with a bow. But he did not notice anything and already came close to the magician. Suddenly, unexpectedly for everyone, he pushes her out of his way and moves on. Things turned out to be even worse because he was on his way to break the dam. Joan was ordered to stop him and quickly climbed onto his back. With a merciless attack with a dagger, the girl pierces his thick skin. Peter instantly flew up to help, damaging the ogre. This was enough for the large carcass to fall into the river. However, with his last breath, the bastard stuck his paw out of the water to finish what he started. With a roar, the dam collapses under a strong impact and the water breaks through. This was a failure, because behind the dam there should have been reinforcements, judging by the clues, who would no longer be able to cross to the other side. The disappointed young man said that they would have to go back and come up with a new plan. He was suddenly stopped by Elizabeth, who wanted to show him something. Suddenly, a purple magical light began to surround her, and she used a previously unknown technique. With the help of this force, she lifted a huge boulder up. She moved her into the gap, which helped save the mission. Stunned, Peter had just learned that his comrade had telekinesis and didn't even know how to react. Now all they had to do was fight and destroy their enemies. The goblins returned again, but with reinforcements. The leader began to worry, because enough time had passed since the launch of the floor, but still there was no hint of help appearing. Elizabeth had to drink the last of her magic potions, and when she was distracted by drinking, the girl was suddenly attacked by a goblin. At the same moment, a horseman with a lion's head appears on a horse. The goblin is cut into 2 parts with 1 blow, thereby saving the aristocrat. It turned out that the Iron Lion cavalry had come to the rescue. The hungry eyes of the monsters turned their gaze to new victims, and they rushed into battle. A horde of soldiers in iron armor burst out of the forest. There are approximately 500 horsemen in the cavalry. The heroes are still in the minority, but they have arrived much stronger than the ordinary soldiers guarding the city. Peter saw a couple of freed horses and offered to ride to the fortress on horseback. Due to the fact that he did not know how to ride, he asked the master for a book of skills. Horse riding. The hero cannot learn skills that are not directly related to battles, but can gain initial ones in this way, which is what he did. Peter and Elizabeth got on one, and Charlie and Joan got on the second horse and went towards the wall. The greatest danger is in the north, where they are besieged by ladders, but the cavalry also understands this, so they headed there. After analyzing the situation, the head came to the decision to go their separate ways. The team had to retreat to a safe distance from the battle and move towards the forest. Just as they approached the thicket, the rain stopped. Seeing goblin riders ambushing them from the forest, the team decided to try and stop them using magic. The most terrible things happened at the walls of the city, where the goblins crowded together. The terrible ogres have already begun to approach, preparing to destroy everything and everyone. Peter explained to the heroes that it would be bad if the wolf riders entered the battle. The cavalry alone could not withstand such an attack. Elizabeth was ordered to focus on area of effect instead of force so that the team could get through the forest. Meanwhile, goblins were actively trying to climb the walls using ladders. The young hero fought bravely against his opponent, even though he had little experience, until he began to be dragged away by a falling goblin. But Emma intervened in time and saved the guy's life. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, the girl noticed unusual people on the battlefield. These were their saviors, the brave cavalry of Iron Lions. They fought their enemies fiercely and skillfully, leaving behind only bloody corpses. She rejoiced the newcomer that reinforcements had already arrived, which meant victory was approaching. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was furiously burning the creatures in the forest. They burned in their lair with a furious roar. It became clear from her that if she called on magic again, her reserve would burn out, so for now, her role was ending. The group saddled their horses and galloped away from the cleared monster territory. The defense continued. About 100 soldiers survived on the northern wall. Many of the city's defenders died before the cavalry arrived. Half of the reinforcements fell under the onslaught of the ogres. And after that, the battle went against the remaining goblin horsemen, who joined later. If Elizabeth had not lit the fire, the cavalry would have been destroyed too. The abilities of the riders are amazing. Their qualitative advantage more than offset their disadvantage in numbers. Shouts of victory echoed throughout the battle area. The second group on the wall also rejoiced at their victory over their enemies. Satisfied Peter, along with the heroes, was glad that he had not received a single notification that someone had gone into the arms of the goddess. They were clearly different from those on the 5th floor. Suddenly the leader became wary, because for some reason they were not being returned back. They killed all the monsters, but the message about the cleanup never appeared. Suddenly a loading board appeared on the screen. Then a notification about recovery. Everything around became like a computer bug. Everything froze. A disconnection error from the server appeared. In this house, someone whispered to Peter to turn around, and he saw a terrible demon of level 999. The hero immediately remembered how exactly this creature killed his team and dragged him by force into the game. The guy's eyes lit up with a desire to take revenge on the bastard for his terrible actions. But the dark apostle who was next to him suddenly said that he would be waiting for him. After this, the demon disappeared, and the apostle began to slowly leave and disappeared into the fire. A message appeared indicating that the recovery was complete and that the connection to the server had been reconnected. Joan asked excitedly about what had happened and was concerned about Peter's condition. The commander immediately shouted for everyone to urgently move to the castle. They rushed to the gate as quickly as they could, because the guy knew that nothing was over yet. Never before had information surfaced that a dark apostle could appear on the lower floors. His terrible ability is to resurrect the dead. Instantly, the dead battlefield turned into an uprising of insane undead. Apostles can raise corpses that meet certain conditions, and zombies will attack until their skulls are cracked. In any case, this is not the monster that should appear on the 10th floor. Meanwhile, a group of heroes is already entering the gate. Peter left the team outside the gates, ordering them to defend the statue of the goddess along with Elizabeth. The guys only had to hold out until he returned, and the young man himself prepared for a solo battle. Although the zombies look terribly disgusting, it shouldn't be difficult. so the guy decided to deal with them one by one. Having driven a decent distance, the leader saw that a huge ogre had also rebelled and was trying to break through the gate with powerful blows. Peter was helped by Joan, who shot enemies attacking him from behind. After a few blows, the gate was broken, and all the residents and soldiers fell into panic. Many creatures appeared before their eyes. It was a terrible sight. Peter only needed to get rid of the apostle. He disappeared into the forest among the lights, where he was waiting for him. The leader decided for himself that he would kill this monster at any cost. Emma's leadership qualities are much better than he expected. Even in such a critical situation, she makes informed decisions. They needed to concentrate on protecting the goddess statue. If the outer wall falls, then they will have to devote all their strength to protecting the inner one. If Charlie and Joan use their experience gained from the 5th floor, then they will hold out longer. Scared to death, residents pushed each other, trying to escape from the monsters. Crowded at the gate, they begged to be let in and not to be doomed to death. Peter, in turn, wondered how long it would take to kill the Dark Disciple. Thanks to today's battle, he received the skill Resistance to Fire Level 2. Covering his nose from the smoke with his hand, he skillfully fought with the forest creatures. Coming to the end of the map, he realized that the apostle was waiting for him here. Notifications came about the death of 2 newcomers, about Emma's injury and Duke's fear. The apostle unexpectedly said that he wanted to talk. But for Peter, the time for talking had long passed and he launched an attack. The guy didn't wait and immediately went into berserker mode. Daggers flew at the dark student, and he, in turn, began to launch magic projectiles. Several of them hit the guy's body, but through the wild pain he did not stop his attack. And a moment later he mercilessly tore his enemy to pieces. Hollowed through and left without an arm, he looked at the apostle who had fallen at his feet. Soon he sat down under a tree, bleeding and waiting for the message that the floor had been cleared. Peter assumed that he would rather die than have the statue of the goddess destroyed. At the other end of the map, the heroes were diligently destroying monsters. Unfortunately, not all of them were able to withstand the onslaught of the enemy. But most of them fought, sparing no effort to protect the statue. At some point, the now golden statue of the goddess glowed with blue light. Peter, sitting on the ground, barely alive, began to disappear in the light of the movement. The floor was cleared, all the heroes were able to level up. Thanks to this mission, they received the basic fire element stone. A notification popped up that evolution was available to one of the heroes. By combining stones and collecting all the necessary materials, the master would have access to a fragment of memory, and adventure dungeons also became available. The next day, in the evening, Peter woke up in his bed, realizing that everything was fine with him. He decided to check on the others. Entering the dining room, he noticed Charlie with a very worried face. Charlie breathed a sigh of relief when he saw the leader alive. The commander asked what thoughts put him into an anxious state. It turned out that he was thinking about the meaning of their battle, because when Peter left the walls, corpses invaded the city and many NPCs died. The young man apparently got too nervous, so he went to the side. After a while, many amazing dishes appeared on the table. Joan admired the overly chic presentation, to which Chloe said that Peter asked to prepare the best dishes from the available ingredients. Basically, the guys were fine after yesterday, but Duke clearly still needed to recover. When the master entered the game, the first thing he did was add the hero elevation room to the synthesis hall. He began synthesizing items to obtain the exaltation stone. Satisfied, Izzy flew to Peter as soon as possible to congratulate him on his elevation. She handed him the stone and wished him to quickly reach the 7th star and conquer the tower. The young man remembered how much effort he put into this crap to get a 7-star character. He assumed that there were probably some special conditions for this. The hero moved towards the stairs leading to the dais. The master himself has no idea what is happening in this room. Only the hero himself goes through the elevation. As soon as the stone touched the panel, a beam of light illuminated the entire space and teleportation began. Peter was transported to the living room, where the mother was rocking the child, sitting by the window. There was a wall between them that prevented him from getting closer. The real Tim guessed that this was Peter's past, in whose form he was now, because the guy himself had no family. He had no idea what was going on, but in order not to waste time, he went out and found himself in the lobby. A guardian fairy with a kind smile, similar to Izzy, flew towards him. However, she was smaller and could not speak, only indicating with gestures that he needed to go through the rift. A huge gate with the inscription Dungeon of Predecessor appeared in front of him. Its complexity was prohibitive. The triple warning sounded. Peter began to feel fear due to the terrible pressure. But he was not taken aback and instantly entered berserker mode, which helped overcome fear. Opposite him stood the same demon who was clearly waiting for their meeting. instantly taking out his sword and holding it out to the enemy. Peter wanted to kill this creature, but he understood that his level was 999, and it was almost impossible to kill him. The demon destroyed Master Leo's group in less than 10 seconds, which included heroes with 5 and 6 stars. The Scarecrow arrogantly asked if the guy wouldn't attack him, because he clearly hated him, to which the young man got angry and told him to send him back instead of talking nonsense. The bastard clapped for such self-control, because without it he would have died in the beginning. Suddenly the hero had a headache. Is this really what happens to everyone on the dais, of course? The demon replied that he was special, and this place is a gift for him. After this phrase, long hair began to wilt from the dark flesh. The matter began to turn into women's neat legs. The real Izzy appeared before Leo only in human form. Indeed, they were similar. It turned out that the guardian fairy was a duplicate of the real girl. She began to materialize some object in her hands. Throwing it into Leo's hands, the guy saw that it was the business card of the president of the Mobius Corporation, which was the founder of the game Choose Me. He was annoyed by such mockery, but the sweet girl said that she has many names, which depend on the circumstances. With a cold look, the young man demanded that she send him back immediately if he did not want to die, looking arrogantly at some one-star hero who was threatening her. The girl said that his fantasy was running wild. Stomping her foot, the beauty released dark energy in the form of an arrow directly at Leo. The spear pierced the hero's chest and touched his very heart. The girl admired the courage of the man who didn't even blink when he was almost killed. Her dark matter had dissolved, and Leo still didn't understand what she wanted from him. The girl continued to say that she was a fan of the unstoppable master of invisibility, the 5th in the whole world. She received great pleasure from watching his games. It turned out that she came to him to tell him the truth of this world. Story is a factor that is usually overlooked when playing these types of games because people are more interested in the content. In fact, the story of Choose Me is quite ancient. A mysterious girl transported them to the city, beginning her story. They found themselves on the continent of Taunir, the Heim Peninsula, the city of Nelsa. Despite the fact that they found this city on the 10th floor, it was completely destroyed. She continued to show different cities: Silkia, Kaya, Idora, Peonia, Madian, Icardia, Lilgia, Halcia, and many other completely destroyed places. All the continents connected to Mobius turned into this. Over 100 million worlds were destroyed in an instant. She spoke of this with a clear hint of the destruction of Niflheimer, a book whose ending is already predetermined and bad. Each character dreams of a different ending. Their goal is simply to drag the reader of the book inside. They need to correct and rewrite history. Even if the world ends up in Hausa, a being from a higher dimension is capable of changing the cause and effect relationship with just one observation. This is the reason why Choose Me was created. After the story, the girl extended her hand to Master Leo and asked for cooperation. And at that moment, a dagger flies at her, piercing her skull. Leo was interested in what the girl would say, but all her words turned out to be nonsense. She asked him to think carefully, but the young man had nothing to think about. He was not going to cooperate with the demon who forcibly dragged him here and forced him to go through all this suffering. Pulling the dagger out of her head, she began to approach him arrogantly, saying that she was in pain and that he was too cruel. The guy bluffed as best he could, but he couldn't kill her now, because being only a one-star hero, he couldn't do anything, so he just repeated again to bring him back. Pseudo-Izzy continued to say that she had to go through a lot of difficulties to bring him to this place. She really valued him compared to other masters. After all, only he achieved such a unique achievement that no one else has, namely, Master, trust your connection with the heroes. Suddenly, she moved them to the 80th floor, which only 5 out of hundreds of millions of players received permission to pass. Leo didn't understand why she was showing him this. It was simple. The demoness wanted to watch this game scene together. I wondered what it would be like to see everything live, through the eyes of the characters and not watch what was happening through a screen. The 80th floor was different from the others. The task was to conquer it, but there were no specific goals. Everyone who tried to pass it had one thing in common: failure. So among the players, the name Wailing Wall was secretly assigned to the floor. Master Leo knew how to successfully pass this floor. He did not understand why she was showing him his successful raid, to which the girl only replied that he should look carefully and see for himself. After passing the 79th floor, he felt quite confident ahead of the attempted attack on the 80th floor and paid for it by losing almost all of his forces, with the exception of the main group. Hell was the only word that fit the description of the 80th floor. Living beings could not hope to try to survive there. The shards of chaos, despair, and anger were the biggest pain in the ass of any master on this floor. It was because of them that the level was so high. The girl decided to cast a bait on the fact that in Choose Me, the difficulty level depends on the master's account. As well as the possibility of summoning, there was an intrigue lurking why Leo never got a 5-star hero. Is this just a pathetic failure or an unpleasant coincidence? The reason why he did not get the desired character was not that the master was unlucky. There were simply no heroes left in Niflheimer. By the way, this also applied to the level of difficulty. His city is one of the few S ranks, which is one of the worst situations for the master, up to. It still remains a mystery to the mysterious girl how, under such conditions, he managed to reach the 80th floor. At that moment, a bright light lit up on the nearby flying island, moving the heroes to the floor. The Fab Five were assembled and prepared for a brutal battle. They were confronted by terrible, huge monsters that knew no end. Suddenly, the entire playing field froze as the GM applied the Tactical Outpost effect and took control of the mission map. Master Leo was shown setting objectives and coming up with tactics for his heroes. The enthusiastic pseudo-Izzy said that the tactics were quite entertaining because capturing key points in a special order, just before the army advances, is a difficult task. But the goal is simple. She asked to pay attention to the actions of the team, to their attitude towards Master Leo. The heroes watched with admiration Leo's impeccable tactics. Each of them understood that they could not let down their valuable master. They began a roll call in which they swore allegiance to him. The first was Charlotte, a sweet girl with a long braid who was the king's arrow. Spear of the king, Christopher, a young guy with a serious look. Archie is a big beefy guy. He was the king's sword. The beautiful magician Holly was the king's eye. Of course, their leader Hannah is the king's flame. As soon as the vows ended, the mission began, and a huge mass of enemies rushed towards the five. The spellbound demoness watched how sincerely they swore allegiance to the master. Rising higher and higher in the tower, the heroes begin to realize the truth, and gradually, their hearts are overcome by despair. Which is why the player's connection with the heroes is so important, because no one will be loyal when he is treated like a pet. Master Leo was different. He was the only one who was revered, being the true king of Niflheimer. Indeed, even now the inhabitants of Niflheimer are desperately looking for him because they know that he came here. What kind of hero in his right mind would search all corners of the world for months in search of a missing master? Would the heroes of other masters really do the same? And the girl was also very interested in the fact that there was a master who had never used synthesis, when everyone else punished the disobedient, kept the heroes under control with fear of synthesis. Leo never came across a 5-star hero. Only Hannah had 4 stars. People said that his account was bugged. They persuaded him to quit or get a new one. But Tim got used to injustice from an early age, being a lonely kid without a family. Before the guy became famous, most players used heroes literally as toys. They simply threw them away when they got bored with a particular character. Even if the hero had a small rank, Tim preferred not to give up on him if he showed even a little potential, knowing that a city controlled through fear is the path to fall. The girl came to the conclusion that Master Leo somehow found out that the heroes were living people, which is why he behaved this way. Tim said that he noticed how the characters behaved too realistically, which made it difficult to believe that they were just characters created by the program. It turns out that the girl liked Leo's rule, and that's why she wanted to talk to the young man. Furious, Tim shouted at this girl, saying that he had nothing to do with this world and everything that was happening. He was an earthling and needed to be returned home. Master Leo had virtually no losses until the 88th floor, and that very wailing wall on which the top 1 player was stuck at that time. Before conquering the 90th floor, he literally had to stretch out his hand, and it was at that moment that they dared to pull him out here. The demoness continued to say that he could become a warrior, that Mobius would save him, but since he did not want to cooperate, she would calmly wait until he grew to her level. With an evil smile, she said that the Tanya in which he found himself would be able to surprise him without her intervention, because this world has S-class complexity, like Niflheimer. She began to manipulate, saying that no matter how good Peter was, the master had a 90% chance of abandoning the game, but that could change if she reached out. The girl began to swear on her name that she would return him home if he conquered the tower, and also transfer half of her share in the Mobius Corporation to his account. Leo asked never to appear in front of him again. He did not believe a single word she said. Once again, he powerfully throws a dagger at the demon's cute face. He decided for himself that on the way to conquer the tower, he would find the answers and find out the truth and return on his own without the help of this garbage. She was sympathetic to his answer, saying that she would forget about his disrespect for her. And yet the girl decides to show something once he has begun his ascent. She opened access to the real Choose Me prologue, prepared especially for him. The story began about a fertile land on which people and other races coexist peacefully, Tanya. This continent lived in peace and prospered. However, the calm days came to an end. An unknown enemy attacked the borders of the states. The earth drowned in rivers of blood unleashed by dark forces. But even in these times filled with despair and madness, people have one hope. This is the Master. On this path, many heroes will stand shoulder to shoulder with you. Believe in their devotion and in your friendship with them, because the future is in your hands. The path will be blocked by countless enemies. Many of them hiding in hidden lands are so powerful that it is difficult to imagine. When the story ended, the doors opened back up. The girl wished him luck in conquering the tower, and Leo headed into the hall. The Master received a congratulation on awakening the hero's forgotten memories. Peter successfully completed the process of increasing stardom, and is now a 2-star hero. The level limit has been removed and skills have been improved. When the boss returned to the team, he warned Charlie that he too would soon be promoted. Peter looked at the young man and saw his little sister, the reason for which he would fight and strive to get out. Leo promised himself that he would definitely take revenge on the demon who arranged all this. The next day, when anything entered the game, a message appeared apologizing to all the masters for not having access to the game for some time. All players located on the lower floors of the tower experienced a disconnection, so Mobius representatives issued an explanatory notice. But Leo was sure that what happened was related to the appearance of a demon with an apostle on the 10th floor. Compensation was given for the glitch. It included 500 gems, 50,000 gold, 1 gift ticket to improve your relationship with the heroes, and the removal of restrictions on visiting weekly dungeons for 3 days. A happy Izzy rushed to congratulate Leo, but he quickly stopped her joy when he announced that he had met her main body. The fairy was shocked by this news, not understanding how this happened. The hero only asked her for help in climbing the tower. Izzy, of course, agreed, and also gave him the ticket that the Master gave him so that he could buy something for himself. A gift is something that the player can give to the hero if he did something that he liked. Its value may vary. Leo contemptuously gave back the ticket he had been given, telling him to give it to someone else. He explained to the excited keeper that the things he would like to purchase cost more than 10,000. However, the Master decided to please Peter himself by purchasing a warhorse figurine with a gift ticket. As soon as she was in his hands, he mercilessly threw her to the ground, because it is dishonest to give gifts to only one hero when you have many other worthy characters. Looking at the broken figurine, the farmer said that different heroes want different gifts, and giving them anything is nonsense. He fondly recalled that at one time Master Leo remembered the hobbies of each of his top 100 heroes in Niflheimer. Suddenly, Anything decided to call the heroes of the first squad on a mission. The Master was clearly in a hurry with his decision because Elizabeth was on the verge of nervous exhaustion due to incessant training. A good master would first take care of his heroes. In front of the team there was a gate to the 11th floor. The guys were not happy about this news. Joan was worried that they were being sent to the next floor so soon. Peter realized that their master was under the common delusion among players of, "God, I'm so good," a disease that makes players think that because of their smart decisions, missions are won and floors are completed. In a good way, he should have been allowed to farm the lower floors and only then sent to 11. But now it became clear that he doesn't understand a damn thing about this game. The heroes were met by skeletons crawling out of their graves into the cemetery. Peter ordered the team to get ready and get into position. One of the reasons why Choose Me was called a cheap crap RNG game was because the difficulty on the lower floors of the tower was completely random. If you're lucky, you'll get a good hero and be able to go through the starting floors without any problems. And if you get slag, you'll suffer even on the easiest missions. While the leader fought, thinking about the player, the team bravely fought against a new type of enemy. Elizabeth, despite being exhausted, successfully cast her magic spells. Peter noticed that the Master's thinking was developing approximately the same as his. In his time, changes occurred after the conquest of the 5th floor. His thinking began to turn in the wrong direction. He made 5 donation calls in a row, without properly preparing the conditions for this. Then, through heroes who were not fully developed to the 10th floor, he made a lot of mistakes. After successfully completing the floor, Peter decided to call Izzy. He wanted to find out something from her. Unfortunately, the fairy could not reveal many secrets, being limited in her capabilities. But for her beloved Master Leo, she was ready to make an exception. The first question was the name of the girl director. Since she had about 100 million names, the keeper was not immediately able to answer the question, but after thinking about it, she said that for the world of Tanya, her name would be Terra. After conquering the 10th floor, the name of the hero's base city changes. Depending on the master, here it is Tanya. For Master Leo, it is Niflheimer. For other players, it is different. The next question was what Mobius was, but Izzy just calmly answered that it was a company. Peter clarified that he meant a deeper meaning. Then it turned out that this is a spiral universe, connected in parallel with many worlds. It seemed to Master Leo that he was slowly beginning to understand what this Terra was all about. The hero asked whether the anything person was a real person, to which the fairy answered in the affirmative, because only an earthling can become a master. Correcting his question a little, the guy asked about the connection between the player and Terra, which greatly excited Izzy. The fairy instantly disappeared to find out such provocative information. The joyful guardian returned after a while, announcing that there was another director, assuring her that they were not related. She assured him that doing something like this in the initial stages is only possible in emergency circumstances, and in addition, such an action entails a lot of risks. A little later during training, Peter reflected that he was not mistaken, and their master is a classic player with the disease, "I carry everything lightly, God. How good I am. How powerful my hands are. If the symptoms get worse, this will lead to serious problems in the near future. By taking the right measures against it, the heroes will have a chance to return it to normal. One of the best ways to cure a master's star fever is to sober him up, making him unable to use the main characters he relies on most." After a while, the master entered the game and the first thing he did was call on Peter's group. The guys were excited about such a quick climb up the floors. Izzy effectively reopened the rift of space and time for the heroes. The captain suddenly stopped and called the fairy to find out which floor they were heading to. After he found out that it would be 12, he refused to participate in the raid. The team began to worry about whether this could really be done and whether everything would be fine later. Izzy tried to convey to him that with such impudence he could enrage the master and he would send him for synthesis, which he would no longer be able to refuse. The heroes stood in a stupor for some time from the information they received because it completely changes the course of things. Soon the entire group refused to participate, for which the master could listen to their demands or punish the leader. The master could not even think that the heroes could disobey his orders. Suddenly, Izzy called a second team to the square. Emma asked why they didn't go to the floor, to which Peter calmly replied that they refused. The commander of the second detachment warned the guy that this could be very dangerous if he did not show his usefulness. The team gathered together to discuss the question of whether they should go into battle or be threatened by fusion. After thinking a little, they decided that they needed to become stronger and the guys would go to fight. Peter warned Joan that if they do synthesize him, then they should never disobey the master's orders because this way they can survive. However, the entire team unanimously declared that they did not believe in the death of the head. Suddenly, terribly exhausted, wounded heroes who were clearly disappointed in the actions of the master began to emerge from the rift. Emma turned to Peter with a request to show him how to properly disobey an order. The satisfied young man said that it was very simple, telling him how to do it. After which Emma refuses to participate, and the entire team number 2 is out of the control of the master. The boss's plan worked. The master can no longer complete the main dungeons. The exploration dungeons are no longer available, and the lobby is frozen. Although they refused to follow the master's orders, the heroes needed to behave as usual, so the commander ordered to continue training. Peter has already figured out what they can do, namely visit the weekly dungeons, where they can be on their own. He didn't care whether the master abandoned the game or whether he synthesized Leo, because it was better to die without pain than to bust his ass in a dungeon. Moreover, the death of the leader, although it will raise the stress level of the heroes, can be easily solved with the right approach, if, of course, the master has enough brains. The next day, the first group went to the weekly dungeon. To complete 2 different dungeons, the team split up. Elizabeth stayed with Peter, while Joan and Charlie were together. They were able to obtain the fire element base stone. After this, the heroes continued to train. The leader's shield and sword technique reached level 6. Elizabeth was given the task of training telekinesis until she acquired the appropriate skill, which the fire mage was not very happy about. That day, the master did not enter the game, just like for several days in a row. But when he finally deigned to come in, Izzy cried with joy. Emma assumed that anything had thought about his actions, but Peter didn't think so because the "aren't I good" syndrome? It doesn't heal that quickly. The master decided to spend 1,500 gems on the summons. The first one he got was the 3-star knight Bertrand. The second was a burning bitch, Samantha, also with 3 stars. The last one to fall was the old man, Mason, as rare as the first 2. Emma noted that if the situation was the same as with Elizabeth and Robert, then she would have to choose again. but Peter stopped her, saying that none of them would join the teams. As soon as the new heroes entered the square, they began to quarrel terribly among themselves. When the battle between Samantha and the enraged Mason was about to begin, the commander slowly walked towards them. As soon as the knight saw him, he immediately ran to him for help, because they didn't listen to him at all. The sarcastic Samantha took up the mockery of the brat, who was simply lucky to be born into a rich family. She had absolutely no intention of listening to his orders. Now the young knight could not tolerate the insult to his family and rushed into battle. Emma asked why they hated each other so immediately. The leader suggested that they were simply not compatible. Only the formidable little fairy was able to stop the fight. Izzy explained that the heroes are forbidden to fight among themselves, especially in the lobby. The hot girl, realizing that she needed to make a team, immediately pointed her sword at Peter and expressed a desire to be in his group. The Guardian explained that they were not allowed to choose their own teams, after which the Master decided to unite the completely incompatible Trinity together and sent them to the floor. After such a show, the boss decided to go to bed, because there would be nothing interesting anymore. Arriving in the room, notifications fell one after another that the trio had begun to fight among themselves. No matter how Peter tried to sleep, he was unable to do so due to the loud messages. Everything calmed down when the announcement of the death of the entire team surfaced. Instantly, Izzy appeared in front of him, all in tears. She rushed at him in panic when the Master abruptly left the game. The fairy became hysterical, saying that the account is deleted if the Master does not log in for 6 months. The poor Guardian was in tears, thinking how she would be deprived of power, how she would dissolve. Leo began to reassure the drama queen that they didn't know whether the Master would leave for good or not. When the guy found out that Izzy would die if he didn't climb the tower, he began to worry. However, the next day the Master entered the game and bought a triple gold set, which contained 5,000 diamonds and 3 gift cards. This news caught the heroes in the training arena. The Master decided to start an advanced summoning of 3 characters at once. The first one to come out was a blonde, impudent guy. His name was Maxwell. A bearded man named Norwood was summoned to follow him. The last hero summoned was a young archer, Albie. Peter met the heroes and immediately ordered them to go to the training site. He asked Emma to be on hand. Joan noticed that Peter's behavior was much more delicate than when Adam's group appeared, where Emma had previously been. Suddenly, the impudent Maxwell ran into Peter from behind. Turning around instantly, the young man hit the guy in the face several times to moderate his ardor. Emma took over the express training session with Albie, starting a fight with him. While they were wholeheartedly busy with the 2 recruits, Norwood stood aside in horror, not knowing what to do with himself. The Master created a group of 3 newcomers and 2 more 1-stars, after which the quick training was completed. The heroes were called to the rift, and they set out to conquer the floor. After their return, one of them was seriously injured, but they passed the test. Since the Master decided to give a ticket, it means the newcomers have learned their roles well. After a few days of training, Joan became concerned about the new arrivals. After all, because of them, the first group may lose their positions. As time passed, they picked up a magician, but in general the balance was not bad. The third group grew inexorably without a single loss. Anything's plan seemed to be going swimmingly. Gathered in the dining room, the trio discussed that they would soon surpass the main group and also planned to take the magician for themselves. Suddenly, Peter unexpectedly entered, scared Maxwell. There was no need for him to intrude on their conversation, so he simply went about his business, realizing that they had no concept of teamwork. Not without problems, their group broke through the 14th floor. As it turned out, floors 13 and 14 were easy, but floor 12 turned out to be really difficult, or they were just lucky. Peter reasoned that none of the third group had reached level 10, but the Master would still send them on. As soon as they passed the 15th floor, his group would be synthesized. Dissatisfied, Elizabeth expressed her opinion that while they were making circles, the third group was quickly catching up with them. The leader said that they just need to wait a little until their time comes. He also asked the magician to demonstrate his new abilities, which the girl did with ease. The Master does not develop at all in the lobby. There are good buildings, but they are overpopulated with heroes, and new places for construction were opened even after the 10th floor. It's time for him to erect buildings on the 3rd level, but there is no hint that he is going to do this, because all his attention is focused on the 3rd group. The members of the new group realized that the Master was favoring them and began to show their true colors. So far, only petty grumbling at Chloe to serve more meat and stealing a sofa from the common area. After a while, a 3rd group is called back to the square. This time, they take 3 health potions with them. A dissatisfied Joan is angry at the new arrivals who take away what others have worked hard on. A lot of people gathered on the street to see how the newcomers, who who were already boring everyone, would cope with the 15th floor. Maxwell, with his attack and threat that when he returns, he will give the heroes a good thrashing, went into the crosshairs. The guys were worried about what would happen if the third group succeeded, to which Peter said that he would have to obey the master or everyone would die. The third group can and will pass the 15th floor. There are levels at which it would seem the group should definitely die. But the heroes successfully complete it. This also happens. But in this case, the master will believe in himself, and the first group will be left behind. Apparently, everything is fine with them, since the leader has not received a single system notification, and they have been there for 5 minutes. Suddenly, a huge notification appears about the failure of the mission and the death of the entire group. Suddenly, everything began to shake, as if an earthquake had begun. It turned out that the master left the game and threw his phone in a fit of anger. Izzy, in a panic, began pestering Peter with questions about what they should do now. The leader calmly said that the heroes were removed before the main action began. They didn't even earn any points for the floor. After that, the master did not enter the game for a long time. Izzy changed into pajamas and constantly whined to the boss about how they should be now, what to do now. But the guy diligently tried to ignore her. After all, life goes on. They will continue to wake up, have breakfast, train, have lunch and train again, and then train even more until dinner. Other one-stars were idle. They believed that now their hands were free and there was nothing to fear, because there was no master, no synthesis, except for a couple of people. No one even went to the weekly dungeons. Unexpectedly, after 10 game days the master deigned to return. Izzy was happy. Some kind of flash illuminated the entire settlement of heroes, after which the master immediately left the game. The fairy was dumbfounded. The keeper panicked, and Peter noticed that the player clearly took the screenshot for a reason. The guy asked her about her hobby. Izzy reminded her that she likes to surf the internet. Entering his room, the young man asked the fairy to go online. She said that it is not so easy to do this, because you need to put together all the elements of influence that were left after the master. If he decides to only watch, then the guardian's strength will be enough for an hour. But if Leo plans to write something, then there will be much less time left. Still agreeing, Izzy began the process of logging onto the internet for the sake of her beloved master Leo. The sorceress put all her strength into it and asked to finish her business as quickly as possible, and a computer appeared in front of the leader. He went to the official Choose Me forum in the help request section, where he found a message from the master of anything, who did not know what had happened to his world. In the comments about the guy, many laughed at his actions. Some insulted him for his terrible game, but everyone was unanimous in their opinion. The guy needs to learn how to play. Meanwhile, Izzy was already at her limit and Leo had less and less time. He decided to send all the developments in the game to Leo from his cloud, hoping that now he can change. In the comments to the post, he wrote from Leo's account that the guy should check his mail, after which comments began pouring in with requests to help others instead of this fool. Leo clearly should have written anonymously. Izzy was at the end of her powers. As soon as the boss closed the site, the fairy fell exhausted onto the bed. When he said that he had sent it to the master, the little girl jumped up in delight and began to talk about how he had just shared with the guy the legendary Heavenly Book, which is considered an inaccessible treasure for players. Leo couldn't say that it contained all the information about the game, but there was everything that he managed to write down. There is no confidence that the master would read it, because the volume of records is several volumes of War and Peace, and it was not written for other people's eyes. In any case, if he gets acquainted and can understand, it will become very entertaining. The next day, the master came in to Choose Me, and the first thing he did was give Peter a statue of the Comrade in Battle horse. Satisfied, Leo told Izzy that before sending the letter, he slightly changed the end of the document to a recommendation to give this statue a couple of times to the hero he likes. Thanks to this, he realized that his master was not an irresponsible person, thereby strengthening the connection between the hero and the player. If he really wants to climb to the very top of the tower, he must be at Leo's level, no less. Perhaps now the master has not fully grasped the essence of his achievements, but if he has the will, then Peter is ready to become his compass. After this, the first group became loyal, and the next day Peter was already getting ready for battle, while simultaneously learning from Izzy about the next opportunity to access the internet. It turned out that it all depends on how quickly intervention points accumulate, which accumulate when the master is online and active. They accumulate faster when the level rises. Diamonds are also the physical embodiment of glasses, precious stones that contain the power of creation. Virtual currency is good, but if you deposit cash, the player is given a bonus of 1% of the amount. Peter came out to the team, which was already looking forward to the battle. Charlie was worried about the lack of one hero in their group. The leader reassured him that Emma would join them for a while, and now the second group also became available for battle. The joyful heroes entered the rift, preparing to pass the 15th floor. However, they were moved to 8. The master clearly learned his lesson. At the same moment, goblin riders charged at them. Elizabeth immediately began casting spells, starting with telekinesis. Many monsters were immediately lifted up by an unknown force and swirled around in a whirlwind. Jones skillfully fired 3 arrows at once with one shot, which destroyed 3 targets. Afterwards, the magician began the fiery part of incinerating the creatures. Now she can cast a spell in 10 seconds that previously took 40. The leader himself cut down each creature with quick movements. Emma looked discouraged at the coordinated work of the team and did not understand why she was added to them. The guys successfully cleared the floor, although Emma has not yet adapted to the group, but she is smart and will soon find her place. Tired Elizabeth, who wanted to rest, was picked up by Peter and dragged somewhere, saying that there was still a lot of work. The master received a notification that there is a hero capable of research. The leader and the magician found themselves in a magic hall. The young man said that the girl had to do research. The sudden appearance of Izzy greatly frightened the aristocrat. She showed the magician where she would have to work and what exactly to do. To the girl's objection that she had already studied this earlier at the Magic Academy, the fairy shut her up by saying that this was the master's order that she must carry out. Elizabeth had to complete tasks, which clearly did not make her very happy. After a while, she was able to obtain a research unit. Her speed was 10 units per hour. 10 diamonds would be spent for every hour. Peter assumed that such a low speed would be characteristic of someone who has no skills in research. But when the master set a timer for 3 hours a day, which would take Elizabeth to do research, she began to be very indignant. Clever Peter asked Izzy to send a request to the master. The player received a notification that the young man wanted a fur coat, which he immediately bought. Thus, the cunning leader gave a fur coat to the capricious magician and bribed her for further good work. Anything continued to make changes. He sent heroes weekly dungeons, actively created weapons in the central workshop. He formed a new group, which included newly arrived heroes. The master had definitely changed, which Leo was incredibly happy about. One day, Elizabeth asked Peter if he wanted to study magic. After all, she can help him learn this, and besides, there were the necessary books in the hall. Peter thought about this proposal and realized that if he received 3 stars, he would be able to choose a category. But in the current situation, he would become a warrior, and if he studied magic, he would become a swordsman. This class was not very strong, so the young man refused to study. He decided to make fun of him and asked if Elizabeth specifically wanted to train him so as not to solve everything alone, to which the girl's sharp reaction made it clear that this was exactly what was planned. Suddenly, the aristocrat decided to find out about Peter's life before appearing here, because she did not believe that he was an ordinary farmer, but the guy tactfully asked the girl to focus on tasks. Elizabeth herself was the daughter of a famous family, but all her relatives died during the war. Their silence was interrupted by a powerful flash above the heads of the heroes. There is a notification about the increased hero response due to research. After the message that the goddess blessed the lobby, stars fell from the heavens and headed towards the heroes. One of them flew up to the magician and entered the chest. In the study, there are only 3 options: studying the reaction of heroes, the depths of dungeons, and the development of the lobby. The master chose the first for 30 points. Elizabeth suddenly felt sick and almost fell. Peter advised saying the phrase "statistics window," after which a sign appeared in front of the girl. He explained to the frightened aristocrat that in him she could see her skills in numbers. The third group died because they did not really understand the essence of the mission. The heroes were not aware of the conditions for clearing the floor, since they did not see the system messages. Studying the characters' reactions solves this problem. The leader headed to the exit of the hall and called Elizabeth with him to tell the others about the new product. Entering the square, they immediately saw Charlie rushing towards them, running away from the ghost in the form of a star. Peter instantly caught him and immobilized him so that the star could enter the hero. As soon as this happened, the blonde fell into ecstasy. Joan stood nearby with the window already open. It turned out that she had overheard Peter often muttering under his breath and simply repeated this phrase. In the evening, the team held a small meeting in the cafeteria to discuss their skills and level up. Elizabeth asked Peter how he knew about the phrase that opens the window, but the guy replied that he just stumbled upon it. Naturally, the leader aroused a lot of suspicion among the magician. When Joan praised the commander, Charlie admired her ability for deep licking. The girl proudly only added that this was not ass licking, but a survival tactic. Peter promised himself that if these guys lasted until the end, he would definitely tell them everything. The next day, news of the stat window spread throughout the lobby. Most only saw part of it due to their low level, and some were unable to summon them at all. As usual, the heroes went to the training arena. Peter professionally deflected many of Joan's arrows with his sword. She asked if reflecting everything was a skill, and it turned out that yes. She thought, if there is a reflector, then there must be a counteractor. Her thoughts were quickly dispelled by a powerful attack from behind from the leader. Naturally, the nimble Joan quickly dodged and attacked. The old training is no longer suitable for them. Now it's time to fight with real weapons. From then on, their method of training was to beat the enemy until he was on the verge of death. The commander noticed Charlie and invited him to join, which the young man tactfully decided to refuse. Peter then began to furiously attack Joan. His blow was stopped by the dagger, which was a centimeter from his eye. He quickly dodged and threw the unexpected weapon away from him. Joan continued her infernal attacks and gained the ability to reveal weak point. Shocked by such rapid progress, he continued to deflect an endless stream of arrows. He asked when the girl had time to learn. It turned out that she learned the skill from a strong desire, which greatly interested the leader. It just won't happen anymore. She was calculating how best to build an attack. Make him dodge the first arrow, then aim the second or third at the weak spot, or add in a few deception shots. Due to the skill of tricking Peter with arrows, it became much more difficult for Peter to dodge. A notification appeared about increasing the bow skill base, which made the boss doubt his victory. The guy understood that he needed to learn something better than tracking a target. For example, identifying a target before launching an arrow. As soon as he came to this thought, he immediately received insight, thanks to which he approaches Joan. And after a few blows, the girl found herself defeated on the ground. After training, the team analyzed their skills. Peter was able to get new ones. Charlie only had 3. Joan began to list a long text about her skills. The leader tactfully stopped her, seeing the blonde's embarrassment, and said that the number of skills does not indicate strength, since everything depends on the relationship with your level. If a hero has an incompatible skill, it will do more harm than good, such as the berserk and cold blood skills, but this is a special case. But Joan had 9 skills. She is, of course, the highest standard. The next day, the master decided to combine items to obtain an exaltation stone. The success rate was 87%. However, the attempt was unsuccessful and the items were destroyed. Failure with such a great chance of success surprised Peter unpleasantly. But on the next attempt, everything went smoothly and Joan received the stone to get the 2nd star. Leo's rise was unusual due to Terra's interference. Joan must see something completely different from what he saw. After her successful ascension, Joan emerged depressed and had a dream in which the forest in which she lived was on fire. The guy tried to calm the girl down a little, asking her to just remember about it and not worry. It turns out that memory returns through elevation. Then all the heroes initially have amnesia, and at 4-5 stars they realize the truth, how they were called here, and what happened to the previous world. A little later, Charlie also passed his first elevation. Peter had no idea what kind of dream the young man was having, but his motivation clearly increased. Charlie noticed that the leader was working much harder than others and wanted to stay with him during training. But Peter advised him to rest, since such a load was familiar to him, but not to the young man. As soon as the blonde left, the commander went into berserker mode and began destructive training. He understood that he had become stronger, but still could not concentrate his power where he wanted in this mode. If berserk is activated, then the guy becomes stronger, but the effectiveness of the skills drops and his composure is lost. If they could achieve synergy, they would have long since been combined, for example, as the wielding a sword and shield skill. Emma burst into his solitude with an unexpected question. She did not believe that the young man was an ordinary farmer and asked if he had killed anyone. Peter calmly replied that he was here at the cost of the lives of other people. 3 were synthesized with him. He added that everything that appears in the level are considered monsters, they just need to kill them. Emma was worried that his team might feel differently about the death of their enemies, but the leader assured her that he knew the heroes well and there was nothing to worry about. Izzy skillfully opened the slit and Group 1 entered. Joan suggested that they would go to the 11th floor again, but Peter said that they had warmed up enough and should go up to a higher floor. The heroes were transferred to the 12th floor. Their mission was suppression, and the task was to destroy all enemies. In front of the team stood an army of human soldiers who ordered them to lay down their weapons. Joan, Elizabeth, and Charlie arrived in shock, as they did not expect that their enemy would be a man and not a monster. Emma only calmly accepted that she would again have to go through killing people, since she had already been on this mission before. The blonde protested and said that they should try to talk to them first, hoping for a peaceful outcome. The magician also picked up the guy, saying that this way they could find out useful information. The leader explained that they were different from normal NPCs because they could see them, which meant that the soldiers were enemies that they had to kill. The spearman decided to go forward and enter into a peaceful dialogue. It turned out that the soldiers themselves were forcibly brought here, and they agreed to negotiate. They asked as a sign of peace to throw down their weapons and for the young man to come to them. The leader immediately stops him, reminding him that it is reckless to obey the orders of their enemies. Peter shouted to the soldiers to also drop their weapons, so that the team could be sure of their intentions. They soon decided that 3 of them would go, throwing down their spears. The guy also dropped his shield and sword from his belt for a safe conversation. One of the soldiers heading towards them began to say that he heard a voice in his head that he could not stop. And then he says that the voice orders them to be killed, and his face begins to become covered with black veins, and his eyes become bloodshot. Reacting instantly, Peter rushed to attack. He was ready for such a turn of events. As soon as he ran up to the enemy, he instantly pierced his throat. He killed the second with a dagger directly to the head. The leader turned to Charlie, offering him to kill his enemies or be killed. Without thinking twice, the young man prepared for battle. Joan also accepted the fact that humans could be enemies, so she took out her bow. Each arrow hit the target, piercing the armor of the soldiers. Elizabeth at the same moment began casting to kill these people. Emma admitted that she had no reason to worry about the boys. Peter was a wise leader. When choosing members of the group, he paid more attention not to strength and talent, but to the psyche, the desire to survive, and the willingness to do whatever it takes. These guys are animals in human form. An active battle began. The team did not spare anyone on its way. Thanks to training, everyone was able to dodge a powerful hurricane of flames when Elizabeth began to cast a spell. As soon as the storm subsided, the heroes rushed into battle again. Ruthlessly and precisely, they defeated the infected soldiers. One of them begged Peter for mercy, sitting on his knees, saying that he must return to his family. The commander was surprised how he was going to return back. The soldier was stupefied by such a question. He was overcome by panic, and the boss instantly stopped his suffering with one blow of his sword. After the fight, Emma said that these people were brainwashed, which is why they are so strange. Peter asked if these soldiers were the same as the last time the girl fought with the second team, to which she replied that she definitely killed them. The young man bent down to examine the corpse and saw black and thick blood, exactly the same as Tara's. Returning from the mission, the commander ordered the heroes to get used to killing not only monsters but also people, since there is no difference. As expected, the 13th and 14th floors were also full of humanoid monsters. Their equipment, formation, everything was different. But the only thing that remained unchanged was that they were all hostile towards them. This made the task easier and allowed us to kill them without any regrets. But fighting against human monsters increases stress levels much faster than fighting regular monsters. The master noticed this and decided not to force the heroes to grind. After several days, the team had raised the levels enough to tackle the 15th floor. The equipment workshop was also actively working. Thanks to leather pouches, Peter could carry more things. He was equipped with 2 basic health potions, one of which Izzy helped carry. However, unable to hold the heavy, slippery flask, the fairy dropped the potion. Peter looked at the keeper with a terrible, cold gaze, who was already apologizing profusely for the mistake. Each member of the group was given 3 health potions, and the magician was given 1 along with 2 special magic ones. The long-awaited gate to the 15th floor appeared before the leader. The commander ordered to act as usual. Since he did not know exactly what awaited them, the guys unanimously agreed and trusted him. Suddenly, a notification appeared that the recording had started, which Peter was very happy about. This will be useful for leveling up skills such as insight and evasion. Now the master does not have the opportunity to interfere, but everything will change on higher floors. The young man addressed the team, saying 2 important things. The first of which was that this mission was special. He recalled the statue of the goddess on the 10th floor. The essence of the mission was that they would die if the statue was destroyed. Similar conditions exist on the 15th. The third group died in less than 5 minutes. They did not even have time to engage in battle, failing the mission out of ignorance, and the consequence was death. Therefore, the first thing the heroes must find out is what the mission is. The group does not have much time. About 15 minutes, this was indicated by the quick death of the third group. All this meant that they could automatically fail the mission if they did nothing and die accordingly. Considering that time flows differently in the lobby and on the floors, they have a quarter of an hour, which is very little. The heroes were moved to a completely ordinary city with many inhabitants. They immediately realized that the residents could not see them, since they were NPCs. A message appeared that this mission was defensive, and their task was to protect a certain person. Peter was surprised, to put it mildly, because they would have to look for the right person among all this huge crowd. Probably the third group panicked when they saw such a crowd. They were not aware of the mission and could not understand who their enemy was. Without dealing with the 10th floor, they could decide that their enemies were residents. There are two possible reasons for their death. They were attacked by the enemy while they were killing townspeople, or the one they were supposed to protect died. The leader told the team that the priority now is to find someone they need to protect. Otherwise, they will soon die. He asked if this place was familiar to any of the heroes. It turned out that Charlie had been here before, being a merchant. The young man said that they were in a delta, where numerous crossroads allowed for large-scale trade. In the center of the city, there is a temple for the worship of the goddess. It is a popular sacred place, one of the 3 greatest temples. Apparently, all the residents were heading there. The swordsman suggested that some kind of event was probably taking place there now. Emma was told to cover them while they went to the temple. The girl, with the help of fast and high jumps, was able to climb onto the roof from which she had a view of the landmark. When the team approached the gate, one of the guards noticed them and wanted to block the way. But Peter reacted instantly and knocked the soldier out. He explained to the excited Charlie that since the soldier sees him, it means he is his enemy. The cavalry and other soldiers on the 10th floor did not see them, which cannot be said about these guys. They are not ordinary NPCs. The leader reassured the team so that they would not worry about the young man, since he had not killed him. After that, they went inside and saw an anthill of people in front of the Hall of Silver. An old man in a robe and with a staff came out onto the balcony in front of the residents. Magically, he used his staff to broadcast a message of silence throughout the area. However, the heroes needed to go inside the hall, but security again stood in their way, prohibiting passage. To provoke the soldiers, Peter smashed the sacred statue of the goddess with his foot. Naturally, the enraged soldiers immediately jumped up to stop the heretic. The group had to get through these guys and they started attacking. As always, the leader showed excellent results, cutting down the soldiers one after another. He crushed the last one in his way with his shield so hard that he began to spit blood. While the heroes were clearing the way, the boss was able to get to the door and kicked it down. He found himself in a wonderful hall with huge windows. The leader ordered Elizabeth to use telekinesis to lock the doors with benches. In addition to the heroes, there was also a priest inside who also saw them. Peter immediately realized that this was not the one they needed, since nothing had changed in the mission window. He saw a door to the corridors, where there clearly should have been entrances. Several soldiers, hostile to the guys, burst into the hall from another door. The boss ordered the team to take on these enemies, and he decided not to waste time and slip into another passage. He remembered that the old man had talked about some heiress of the sun, who was most likely their goal. Running along the corridor, a knight came out to meet him, who monotonously began to talk about how he would now take out the goddess's wrath on him. Of course, Peter had no time to listen to him, and he simply ran past. The guy kept rushing through the corridors in search of the right person. He looked into all the rooms he came across, looked at everyone who passed by, but no one approached. There was less and less time left, and suddenly he runs into the next door and sees flowers. A beautiful garden appeared before him, illuminated by bright light. He was quickly noticed by guards who blocked his path. Meanwhile, a beautiful girl wearing a crown came out onto the balcony. The elder turned to Her Majesty, saying that the residents were waiting for her speech. Peter fought desperately to save his target. These knights were on a completely different level than the soldiers below. The guy skillfully destroyed enemies, even though there were more of them. With one last powerful blow, he demolishes the remaining enemy, and his head flies off his shoulders. The young lady began to thank the elder for the opportunity to speak, and at that moment the leader comes in, covered in blood. Grandfather begins to panic and does not understand how he was able to break through the guards. And then he begins to attack with his magic staff. However, he is aiming not at Peter, but at the princess. The girl turned around and was terribly scared, and Peter needed to save her immediately. With one move of his sword, he cuts off the head of the killer magician. A terrible chaos began in the crowd due to fear. Everyone was pushing and trying to escape. The boss looked at the head of the corpse, realizing that the old man was not trying to attack him. All this meant only one thing. The girl was their target. She started bombarding him with questions because she didn't understand what was happening. Peter did not answer, but only quickly covered her with his shield. It turned out that many shells were flying at the heiress. The hero saw that next to them were mercenaries in black cloaks. Each of them had several daggers in their hands. At that very second, they flew straight towards the princess. Naturally, the commander managed to repel the second attack with his shield. He noticed that the blades were coated with a dangerous poison. Suddenly, one of the killers is shot straight in the head. It turned out that Emma, standing on the roof, saw that the guys needed her help. The young man tried to deal with all the enemies as quickly as possible in order to rise to Emma. When they climbed to the top, the girl was surprised to see a child who seemed familiar to her. The girl began to order them to immediately leave here, since they were not allowed to be here. But her loud exclamation was interrupted by an arrow rushing near her. Peter explained to her that if they left, she would die. He gave her the choice to follow them or die. Without thinking twice, she agreed and joined the group. Now a new task has appeared: to leave the city with Tiffany, the heiress they saved. The leader ordered Emma to deal with the bottom, and he himself planned to destroy the rest. Suddenly, the rest of the team rushes in, warning them that there is no time at all as the soldiers are gathering below. The guy said that the heroes remember the face of this child, since they will have to protect her. Elizabeth, when she saw Tiffany, was very surprised because she knew her. Interrupting the magician, Peter announced that they would need to climb down the rope and find a way to escape. It turned out that Emma had already found him. There were fewer soldiers on the left side. Since the path was difficult, the enemies would quickly fall behind. The plan was as follows. First Emma would go, then Charlie, Peter, Elizabeth, who would have to create a wall of flame so that the enemies would not get them, and then Joan. The magician launched a fire salvo. Now the soldiers first of all aimed at killing Elizabeth. Emma climbed over the railing and was the first to go down. After Charlie descended, Peter held the princess tightly and they began their descent together. Below, Charlie and Emma were already desperately fighting with many people, and at some point the spearman felt that someone had managed to plunge a dagger into his belly. When the leader received notification that his team member was bleeding, he was unpleasantly surprised by this turn of events. He called out to Charlie, but he assured him that everything was fine and not to worry. Joan calmly went down last, while the others sweated over survival. Thus, everyone remained alive, and the target was saved, and they could only leave this place. The soldiers went after the witch and the heretics to kill them. The team was surrounded on all sides by many fighters. Emma saw a path along which they could escape, and the magician began to stop the soldiers using telekinesis. With one spell, she lifted many blocks of stone into the air and created a block. Having successfully hidden in an alley, the black-haired girl offered to stop here for a while. The princess fell to her knees exhausted, not understanding how this could happen. At this time, Peter thought that if Elizabeth was strong enough to use the third-level flame, then they could clear the way for retreat. He turned to Charlie to see how he was feeling. The guy had already drunk 2 potions, but they still did not help to relieve the suffering. The blood did not stop flowing. There was pain in his eyes, but he held on. The leader asked the child if she had any skills such as healing. Unfortunately, she could do nothing to help the bleeding young man. The poison renders basic potions useless. He will lose the ability to move after 10 minutes, and the party has no antidote. Suddenly, the swordsman gathered his strength and began to talk about how he could delay the soldiers so that the guys could leave. Joan immediately began to object to this. She believed that they should all leave together. Charlie said it wouldn't work because he was too weak. Peter drank his health potion, realizing that the most logical thing to do was leave the young man here. Otherwise, the team would have to protect 2 already. However, he threw him his second potion and ordered him to drink it. He collected all the remaining potions into his bag. Although they would not cure him, they would prevent his condition from getting worse. The boss handed him a bag with the command to drink 1 potion every 10 minutes. It was decided to split up. Leader and Emma would take Tiffany out of here, and Elizabeth and Joan will protect Charlie until the first team leaves the territory. Emma was worried that it would be difficult for the 2 of them to cope, since there were soldiers waiting at the exit, and they still had to protect the child. But Peter was determined. He said that they would mix with the crowd and leave this place tonight. They just had to wait for the night. They have become less combat-ready due to the division of the group, so they will not be able to break through the path to freedom. However, there are also advantages. A smaller group has increased stealth, and they will be able to pass through stealth. And if the first team does not fight, then they do not need a magician. Fire magic will definitely attract attention, so Elizabeth cannot be taken with them. But Joan and Charlie will be able to choose more flexible solutions in a dangerous situation. The second group should have set foot on the outskirts, where there would be no troops. But if the time came when they could no longer protect Charlie, they would have to abandon him without hesitation. After the separation, Emma said that she had a couple of shelters in mind. The park alleys are quite intricately intertwined, and they can also get inside the building. The team entered a dark alley where drunks were lying around and inviting prostitutes to come to their place. One of the tramps began to pester the young lady. Emma quickly showed where his place was by breaking her legs. They were in stinking slums where it was good to hide. The streets were like a labyrinth and there were too many buildings. The master got a hint that on long missions there are dungeons that extend the mission itself. If the master leaves the game, the heroes continue their work. Peter looked at this child. Although she looked scared, she kept her calm well. He guessed that the goal was not so simple. Emma soon found a great place with a back entrance through which they could escape if anything happened. But for now they needed to hide here until dark. The girl said that she would go look for a way out while Peter protected the princess. Left alone with the child, he thought that perhaps Joan should have been put in his place, because in such conditions there was little he could do. Suddenly, the young lady began to speak and introduced herself to the young man. She told him that she was second in line to the throne of this empire. She waited for a response from the leader, but he said that she would not be able to understand even if he told her. Suddenly, she hooked the guy with a question about whether they were by chance the soldiers who saved Nelsa. Peter immediately remembered the city from the 10th floor. It seems he even heard some conversations of the NPCs about this. Tiffany said that she saw in a dream how soldiers fought desperately to protect the city. But she could not see their faces, but she felt that it was them. Survivors from Nelsa said that they were saved by a certain detachment. According to them, if not for the help of that group, the city would have fallen. But no one was able to see the faces of the heroes. It turned out that the child had been seeing strange dreams for about a year, in which everything around him was waiting for the end. The empire, the city of the 4 founding families, the rest of the small towns and villages, everything on the continent was on fire. She asked if the boss knew that terrible things were happening on Earth. Mysterious diseases, parasites, and monsters were flourishing. She believed that the invasion of Nelsa was part of this, since monsters usually do not interfere with human territory. She admitted to the young man that she needed strength to save the world. Peter realized that she wanted his help, but he suggested turning to the knights. It turned out that no one listens to her, but she is ready to pay whatever it takes for him to become her mercenary. Peter tactfully refused, saying that if he had the means, he could find more suitable people. Nobody believed the princess when she talked about her dreams. Everyone brushed her off, but the leader is the only one who didn't laugh. So she wants to hire him. Leo recalled a conversation with Tara, where they explained to him that this floor demonstrates the past of Tawania. Even if he wanted to help, nothing would have happened. This child is just an NPC. They will not be related in any way when the mission ends. So he refused to help her. The boss, nevertheless, decided to reveal the secret of why he could not become her mercenary, and said that they were from another world. The guy also said that in their world they are given tasks, and if they cannot complete them, they die. Peter said that this time their goal was to protect a certain person. They did not know who it would be, but now that they knew that it was the princess, they would die if they did not protect her. He also said that the team would be returned to their world against their will when they successfully completed the tasks, so he would not be able to provide them with a favor. Tiffany decided not to doubt his story because he didn't laugh at hers, she understands. He has his reasons. The girl said that it was she who called on people to gather in the square. She wanted to get more attention since at the moment she is just dust compared to her brother. Without the help of the heroes, this girl would already be dead. If there is any meaning in the Choose Me missions, then this one is that Tiffany is an NPC who deserves to be saved. When he was almost out of the room, he said his name as a sign of trust in the princess. After a while, the guy returned with clothes in his hands. The girl was too noticeable in her attire, so she should have changed her clothes. The boss came out so as not to embarrass the girl and heard her crying. He knew that Tiffany was having a hard time accepting the situation she found herself in. She looked about 15 years old. When the young lady changed into simple old clothes, which were new to her, the fabric seemed unusual to her. Peter decided to joke, saying that the fabric was chosen by fleas, which is why it is like this, which clearly infuriated the princess. The commander warned that they would leave in 2 to 3 hours and the girl should get some sleep. Night soon fell and the child quickly fell fast asleep. Then Emma returned with the news that she had found a way out. But there was a small problem when they arrived at the place of knights and soldiers before the exit. There were more than 24, which was too many for them. He would have tried to break through himself, but in this case he could not keep an eye on the princess. Successful passage would be counted only if she passed behind the wall. In addition, the level of one of the knights was very high. He was 5 times stronger than those he had dealt with previously. Peter ordered Emma to return to the hideout, where she could find the princess's dress and crown, after which she needed to find Joan and force her to wear them in order to use her as bait. According to Emma's information, the guys will not be able to leave any other way. If Joan appears in the guise of a princess and causes a fuss, then some of the soldiers will leave the gate. The irritated girl agreed with the order and went in search. Peter assessed the situation and realized that he would have to leave the shield. since there was a risk that the reflection on it would be noticed. The leader ordered Tiffany to remain in place until he gave a signal. The team had no more than an hour to do everything about everything. Meanwhile, Charlie became completely ill and had little strength left. The girls, having taken refuge in the lair, hoped that news from the commander would arrive soon, since they knew that the young man had no time at all. Emma quickly found the right attire and prepared to quickly find the team. Peter took cover behind a box and monitored the situation. He knew that Joan and Tiffany had a similar body type, and it would be difficult to tell the real one in such darkness. If the archer is discovered in disguise, the troops will gather around her, putting everyone in danger. They will need to attract the enemy's attention while covering Charlie. There was only one option to complete this mission. It was necessary to act quickly. And while he was hiding, he acquired the skill of hidden steps, which helped him pass by the knights unnoticed. At this moment, Emma bursts into the second team's lair. She quickly orders Joan to change into the clothes she brought. Peter got closer to the guards. He was pleasantly surprised to receive a new skill so timely, although such a skill is usually acquired by thieves. All he could do was wait, preparing for the worst-case scenario where he would have to fight all the soldiers if no one left. However, a few moments later, a firestorm began in the city, which clearly attracted the attention of all the knights at the gate. One of the soldiers ran up and said that they had found a princess who was wearing a white dress with a crown. The army immediately moved forward to detain the witch. There were 4 soldiers left at the exit and that very strong knight. At that very second, he rushed into battle to clear the passage. The soldiers did not even have time to react before they immediately died. The leader did not leave any of the 4 soldiers alive. However, now he had to fight with a strong knight. He assumed that with the current level of strength, he would not be able to break through the armor, so he would have to get into the gaps between the plates. But there were not many weak points. Nevertheless, the hero began to attack the powerful figure. The knight, in turn, perfectly repelled the guy's blows. Peter realized that the bastard wasn't attacking him. The freak knew he'd win if he just stopped him. But Peter wasn't the type to be timid. Notifications about team injuries began to appear, and then the leader entered berserk mode. His strength has increased by 40 units. If he cannot cut the armor, he will simply destroy it. Suddenly, a message surfaced that Elizabeth had fallen into a state of mana frenzy, which occurs when a mage uses too much magic. The guy realized that they had no time left and ordered Tiffany to run. He shouted at her not to pay attention to anything and to run outside the castle gates as quickly as possible while he was fighting with the knight. Suddenly, someone's silhouette flashes behind the girl on the roof, and a mercenary appears behind her and throws poisonous daggers at her. Peter manages to cover the princess with his body, and the weapon digs into the guy's back. He screams for the girl to keep running. The leader again goes into battle with the knight, who hits him in the chest with all his might. If not for the breastplate, his ribs would have been crushed into dust, but he still coughed up blood. Fortunately, Peter inflicted the same amount of damage on the enemy. Hellish pain was visible on him. The mercenary, running closer, shoots at Tiffany again. The boss, having come to his senses, instantly takes off. And with a quick movement of the blade, it turns his face into meat, after which he turns to the knight and jumps back with all his strength to push him away with his feet. The enemy falls at breakneck speed onto the paving stones. Blood flows like a river from his mouth. Meanwhile, the princess had almost run out of the city. Peter gathers all the rage and fury within himself, and he cuts the knight in 2, thereby saving Tiffany. He falls to the ground, the poison spreading through his body too quickly, and he begins to cough up blood. The young man was tired. Only for the last time he looked at the retreating figure of the child, he began to disappear in the blue rays. At this tense moment in the city, Emma was surrounded by many soldiers. Joan, dressed as a princess, was chased by knights trying to kill her. Poor Elizabeth began to go crazy from the madness of mana and suffered, and Charlie lay in the shelter, having drunk all the potions on his last breath. The young heiress ran as fast as she could away from this place. At this moment, the crown falls from Joan's head, and she turns around in fright. She is immediately grabbed by the blue light of movement, and the whole team immediately finds itself in the waiting room, as they have successfully completed the mission. As soon as the girl saw Peter, she began to scream in displeasure that she almost died because of his order to dress up as a princess. The leader praised the team for doing a great job, but the heroes were terribly exhausted. He singled out Emma, thanks to whom they were able to pass this floor much easier. On this worthy note, she left the waiting room, as did the first team, since it was originally planned that she would only be with them for a short time. All this, along with the bait plan, would have been simply impossible without Emma's knowledge of geography and data collection. Peter believed that she was more deserving of the title of the best player. Elizabeth, getting up from the floor, said that she was terribly tired and went to rest. Joan tried to support Charlie, who, according to her, was simply unlucky. When everyone left, the spearman admitted to the boss that he was not sure that he could catch up with the heroes, no matter how hard he tried. It seemed to him that the gap between them was only growing. He apologized and went to his chambers to rest. It's true that the group suffered a lot of losses this time because of Charlie. If he hadn't been injured, they wouldn't have had to take such risks. His current level is 14, although they have the same levels. But the difference in the growth of characteristics is significant. If you take into account skills, then everything is even worse. For now, they are coping with what they have now. However, the gap between the heroes continues to grow. Eventually, he will be eliminated either due to lack of skills or die on the mission. The leader didn't give up on him because he grew up with him. But the guy wasn't crazy enough to keep a useless hero around. If he can't keep up, he'll be left behind. The next day, Peter announced that from today, all training would be at the request of the heroes, which made Elizabeth incredibly happy. This will last 3 days, the team can rest, and the master will not send them into battle. Joan decided that she would continue training anyway, as it had become a habit. After talking with the guys, the commander decided to train. Each weight on his legs weighed 10 kilograms. Without this, he was not tired at all. After Leo sent the anything guide, the atmosphere changed. Low-level heroes were constantly nervous, but they learned to relax, because they were no longer synthesized. Suddenly, a rising star from the third group began to approach the hero, talking about how glad he was to hear that in this place, he could prove his worth and fight for his life. However, now he hears the laughter of people, which is worse than dogs and pigs, which irritated him greatly. Matthew was also from the second generation, but he was a little strange. Although he had not seen the synthesis, he nevertheless willingly trained and had outstanding talent. Next to him stood a girl, also from the third group. Her name was Sarah. It turns out that he came here to ask permission to teach lazy slackers a lesson. Peter looked at him with a murderous look and told him not to cross the line. Matthew put the weapon away, but he wanted to know the truth about whether he needed to prove his worth, as Peter had said before. He assumed that this did not mean anything here, because he had heard that there was a synthesis system that the master for some reason did not use. The leader ordered him to do his job, and soon the young man would know everything. Satisfied with the answer, the strange guy left the training arena with Sarah. Leo recalled how he used to follow the rule of using synthesis carefully, and when he published it, many began to do the same. Fear best forces heroes to act. Without synthesis, no one would listen to the master. Heroes are lazy, do what they want, and do not even listen to orders. Now everything is about the same, considering the number of active heroes and their total number. Suddenly the boss noticed that the carpenter had returned from his daily dungeon. I asked him what happened. He found out that no one was doing anything. They just brought a couple of branches and lay down in the forest. The situation has changed before they had no choice. Now the master should notice that everything is not going so smoothly. Efficiency is rapidly falling, and there are two solutions. First, mass synthesis. In this case, most of the heroes of the second generation will die, but their work efficiency will increase. But if abused, the stress level will rise. Second, motivate the heroes not by fear, but by exploring the territories, which is what the master chose. Peter was happy with this decision and looked forward to changes. Charlie, who had just fought with Joan, suddenly runs up to him and asked him to fight with him, but the hero refused, because he understood that the young man was too tired. However, the team had to postpone their training as the master began to gather everyone in the square. Izzy flew around and checked if everyone had arrived. When she made sure that everything was in place, she ordered the heroes to go into the storage room. She said that they had begun a major renovation, so no one should leave the building, otherwise they might disappear. At this moment, the ground in the building began to move. The residents were worried because of such shaking. Joan reassured everyone that this had happened before. With the advent of new buildings, the area has improved to level 3. Peter said that although there will be significant improvements, they will not meet the expectations of many. Joan continued to talk about how the master was only improving their buildings. She recalled how wretched the shacks were when they first arrived. Everyone began to rejoice that they were finally getting rid of the uncomfortable beds and meager menu. After a while, Izzy announced that the rearrangement was over and everyone could leave. When the heroes saw what happened to their city, they were shocked. 2-story buildings appeared. It became much more spacious. The location of the buildings was changed. The training center is now level 3, which will increase the effectiveness of training. A bathhouse has been built, which will increase the level of pleasure of the heroes. A recreation area has also been added, and the dining room has improved, as well as the food. Satisfied, Joan immediately ran to the long-awaited bathhouse. Emma was delighted with the changes. However, All the admiration of the residents instantly disappeared when they entered the first floor of residential buildings, where there was no furniture. And in the bedrooms there were not even beds, just an empty old room. But there was also a staircase to the second floor, where the heroes soon went. When Joan saw what the second floor looked like, she exploded with admiration. It was very different from the first one. There was luxurious furniture, a large fireplace. The cozy bedrooms had large, comfortable beds. There was a beautiful library room where you could hold meetings, and of course a separate dining area. There was even a separate bathroom. Everyone immediately wanted to live upstairs. A conflict began between the residents. Everyone wanted to live on a luxurious floor. The keeper intervened in their screams, saying that they were doing nonsense. After all, the master will distribute them himself. After these words, she ordered everyone to go to the square. She opened the book and began to read out the master's order. The first group was assigned to the second floor, where they could select rooms. The same applied to the second group. Since there were plenty of rooms, the heroes could choose anyone. Chloe and her assistant, as well as the carpenter and a couple of other useful heroes, were also pleased with the news that the second floor had been occupied. Afterwards, the formidable fairy said that everyone else would go to live on the first. At this moment, the third group returned from the hunt, and they were brought up to date. Joan became worried, but Peter calmed her down, saying that this way their city would return to normal. The girl was worried that 30 people per floor was too much. Shouts of discontent came from a crowd of people who did not agree with the master's decision. The archer did not believe that it was actually necessary to divide them. And at this point, Elizabeth notices that this is comparable to the nobility and peasants. This path is the most obvious if the master wants to manipulate the heroes to the fullest. Elizabeth still didn't like the way the others behaved. Peter turned to Joan to think about it, because she got up with the roosters and immediately went to training, exhausting herself until late. And besides, the girl hunted in daily dungeons. Most of the meat she gets is eaten by everyone, but what the rest have done is nothing. Emma realized that the master had decided to introduce ranks instead of synthesis. Objections about injustice did not subside. Loafers wanted to sleep on beds, not on the floor in terrible conditions. At the beginning of the game, customization of buildings is needed to slightly embellish the lobby until the moment when the masters realize that the heroes are very human. What anything created is the A3 model, which Leo introduced at the start of Niflheim. With all its shortcomings, this is the simplest way to reduce the use of synthesis. Meanwhile, Izzy was driven to white heat, and she hit the ground with such force that all the nearby residents were thrown to the sides. She showed them to their place, because a month ago they all should have been synthesized. They had no idea how lucky they were. She quickly silenced them. The frightened and humiliated heroes stopped complaining. The keeper told them to get out of here. The fairy moved on to assigning duties and turned to Chloe and her assistant Sharon, who were now only responsible for serving food on the second floor. The young man from the first floor was indignant, because in this case they would be left without food. Izzy told him that the lower floor was forbidden to eat meat. In the closet, they could find potatoes lying around and eat them. The young man was furious. He was not happy with the fact that they would have to eat potatoes and sleep on the floor. He was furious and decided to attack the little guardian. At that moment, his hand and sword flew up. Izzy looked to the side furiously, not understanding what the hell had just happened. With a crazy look, Matthew stood with the guy's severed hand, saying that everything is fine as long as he doesn't kill anyone. It turns out that the other day he was talking with one of the residents. He told him that the only thing that matters is how valuable and useful you are to the master. He warned the hero to follow the rules and not disturb the first two squads in order to survive. Matthew saw how the main squads trained and guessed, what can compare except Charlie? It turned out that this man learned all this information from Joan, who loves to talk. He never encountered synthesis, as he arrived after the master stopped it. Analyzing all the information received, he realized that you can become stronger with each battle and earn various skills through training, and Peter is apparently in charge here. The guy wanted to introduce himself, but Matthew was not interested, and he left him. And now, the guy with the acquired knowledge began to actively act. It seemed to him that now it is not so important how valuable you are, considering that before there was a really effective system for filtering out all sorts of rabble. But the master refused the synthesis. He threw his hand to that guy so that he would press it and thereby the hand would be restored. Peter knew the guy was lucky Matthew intervened, otherwise Izzy would have killed him. The fairy turned to the guy who had returned from the hunt and repeated all the information, saying that he was also now on the first floor. He just smiled cheekily, as he knew that he would soon go up to the top floor. The Guardian again addressed everyone, repeating that out of 35 heroes, 13 would live on the second floor, and the remaining 22 would remain on the first. Peter said that if the master decides that the heroes are good enough, then they will be moved to comfortable conditions, so everything depends only on them. Joan remembered how they survived in their time when there was almost no food, and any mistake led to synthesis. Peter conveyed to them that he wanted all the heroes to train like the first group did back in the day. Now there is no need for resource collectors and support, but there is a need for fighters, and the smallest, most talented part will be able to get to the second floor. Half accepted it, the other couldn't. After losing all the comforts, the leader thought it would be worse. Adapting to the new requirements of the system may require abandoning the free gacha mode or gradually changing it. If you change too much in an established system, then be prepared for significant resistance. The leader of the fourth group began to object, saying that he was not going to fight while living like a homeless person. Matthew recalled that when they were fattening, they were also not eager to fight. The fat man decided to attack Peter, saying that he knew his secret, how he influenced the master. Izzy watched this scene in complete confusion of what was happening. The leader of the fourth group motivated some to go against it, which led to the refusal to obey the fourth and fifth groups. The commander was disappointed that the heroes really did not want to fight and had completely forgotten their place. He threw his sword at them and ordered each one to cut off his own hand. Only in this case will he allow them to live. He scared the heroes terribly. The fat man said that they had already realized that they might not obey the master. Peter couldn't help but agree with him. Even Izzy couldn't lay a finger on them, except on special occasions. Emma warned the heroes that when they disobeyed at one time, they risked their lives. The leader stopped the girl, realizing that this was a good offer and did not mind that they wanted to risk their lives. The fat man wanted to say something else, but he was interrupted by the voice of the guardian, who named 3 names. It turns out that the master chose them for synthesis. Matthew couldn't believe anything was finally using this method. The boss was amused that the heroes knew about disobedience, but not about synthesis, although Joan told them about it, but apparently they conveniently forgot about it. The last synthesis took place a long time ago, so now those who know nothing about it are in the majority. Matthew went into the synthesis room, and the other 2 were dragged there by force, and the guy who informed him was there. When the young man came out after the synthesis, he wanted to feel it for himself again. The leader shouted that he had gotten too drunk and his turn was over. After this, it was time to synthesize the following useless heroes to improve Sarah. With tears in their eyes, they said goodbye to this world, disappearing in blue flames. The girl calmly left the hall with new improvements. The fat man realized that he had done something stupid and immediately began to say that he was taking back his words. Thereby, the fourth team returned to the control of the master. And a moment later, they called the name of the leader of the fourth detachment. And Joan, he was overcome by fear, because he thought that if he obeyed the master, the synthesis would pass. It was obvious that this was a show trial, but it was much better than a planned synthesis. Soon the name of another sloth and Emma were named. The young man, in a panic, began to ask for help from Peter, who had a connection with the master. He begged him to stop this madness. The leader said that if he cuts off his hand, then the guy will be able to talk to anything. These idiots have already done a lot of things. The young man could not be kind and allow this. But if someone has the courage to cut off his own hand, then it is better to save his life. Of course, it is not so easy to cut off part of your body. Some have tried, but no one succeeded. To cut off your hand with one blow, you need to have a master-level skill or pump up enough strength, otherwise you will have to cut. Eventually everyone disappeared and it was the turn of another hero and Peter. So, there are 25 of them left. Matthew was not happy that the demonstration was over, but there were still those who did nothing but bark. He noticed that the boss was quite calm. If he were in his place, he would have chopped everyone up long ago. The master launched a 10-fold summoning of new heroes. Now, depending on their rank, the place where they will be called differs. The heroes from the free call are on the first floor, and the premium heroes are on the second. The selection soon began, resulting in at least 2 deaths, and a minority of them were able to reach the second floor. Peter appealed to the team so that they should not lose their vigilance while on the top floor, because they could be taken away at any moment. With the existence of the second opening of the third floor just around the corner, creation will continue and ranks will also be demarcated there. The next morning, the leader was met in the dining room by a pleased Joan. She was delighted with the quality of the dishes. The guy noticed that the quality of the dishes had increased, as the number of people to feed had decreased. With the change of houses, Peter could now see more equipment. The second floor is visible from everywhere, so that even if people are unhappy with the living conditions, they will not be able to set high goals for themselves. After breakfast, the boss went out to the training ground where Charlie was already training, having apparently only slept for 3 hours. The biggest change to the training ground since moving up to high level was the presence of separate training rooms and sparring areas. The training halls are locked from the inside, so now he can train in berserk mode, not only in the early morning, while remaining undetected. The faster recovery of the waiting room does not affect the sparring areas, meaning they can fight in real conditions, and if someone gets seriously injured, they just need to be dragged outside. As conditions improve, the organization of groups will also improve. The problem is who will take places in the first and second teams, Matthew or Sarah. Matthew's personality is aggressive, he is fearless, and his talent is above average. The wild skill he awakened yesterday is a rare ability with less than 1% chance of acquisition. Wilderness is a passive skill that turns conditions such as rage and fear into combat power. So it has a huge ability to interact with skills that force a person to go through certain conditions. Sarah lacks fighting power compared to him, but she is cool and collected, excellent at stealth, camouflage, information gathering, and other special moves. So if trained well, she will become a professional rogue. He looked at the guy who had defeated all his opponents in sparring at once, and understood that there was no point in thinking about others. This arrogant puppy looked at Peter and called him to him with his finger. The boss decided to go down to Matthew and find out what he wanted. The guy asked to give him a lesson because here, in his opinion, there were only dogs and pigs who could not cope with his blade. It didn't take long to persuade Peter. He immediately took a fighting position. The furious guy was very glad that the strongest of them agreed to fight. And so the hellish battle between madness and composure began. The leader easily dodged every blow from his opponent, and choosing the right moment, he kicked him in the stomach with all his might. Matthew was thrown a considerable distance but was still on his feet. The impudent man was finally able to find a worthy opponent and instantly rushed at Peter. The commander understood that there was no need for berserk mode, but in the future it might have to be used. In the afternoon, the first detachment was called to the square. The little fairy was incredibly tired of stomping up and down the stairs. Elizabeth asked where they would be sent. Peter said that certainly not to the dungeons, since they were missing one member. It turned out that the master needed research. They had never been to such dungeons before. Dungeons for exploration become available after the 10th floor, but they first go there after the 15th. Joan pointed to a similar gate, asking if she could use it, but it turned out she couldn't. Charlie asked if such dungeons were really that important, but Peter admitted that there was no particular need for them. This will just kill a little time, about a day or two. The magician did not understand what awaited them, but Peter said that she would see everything with her own eyes. A bag of money appeared in the hands of the head. He told everyone to take 3 coins. Charlie was a little surprised. Elizabeth was wary, and Joan was naively happy about the gold. The team had to explore an area called Heimer. The heroes had a beautiful view of the forest and river on one side, and on the other hand, a whole city appeared before them, which they saved on the 10th floor. Exploration dungeons, unlike the main and everyday dungeons, did not have a clear goal. Sometimes heroes return with nothing, but sometimes they bring interesting things. It seems that this time the NPCs can see them too. In front of the entrance to the city, there was a soldier who asked the heroes for a pass. Peter threw a gold coin into the guard's hand. Of course, they were allowed in, but they were asked not to make noise and not attract attention. Before the floor was cleared, this city was close to collapse. The enemy had almost reached the inner fortress, but now there were no traces. The leader announced that the team can do whatever they see fit. The heroes did not at all expect that the boss would give them the task of doing what they wanted. They couldn't quite believe that the guy wasn't joking, but Peter kept telling them the same thing. Elizabeth quickly realized that she could leave and went far, far away. She wanted to look at the ocean. Charlie decided to rest a little, and Joan planned to go with the commander, but he refused her. The guy noticed some mercenaries discussing some kind of raid. Walking further down the street, he saw an advertisement with a picture of a princess. This child was accused of heresy, summoning demons, insulting the honor of the royal family, murder, arson, theft, robbery, and other famous crimes. Suddenly, a boy approached him and asked if he was hunting a witch. Peter wondered why the girl was called a witch. It turned out that she tore out the hearts of living babies as a sacrifice and used forbidden dark magic, according to this boy. The young man was interested in his story and wanted to know more, but the boy was busy. But when the gold coin was in his hands, he immediately changed his mood and was ready to provide all the information for the master. They went into a tavern, where the boy said that advertisements about the princess had been posted for a year. Peter was surprised because he and Tiffany broke up on the 15th floor just a week ago. The seal on the ad was the same symbol as on the uniforms of those he then killed. If we add up all the facts, then these advertisements began to appear after the girl fled the city. Most likely she was wandering somewhere. At least she was alive. The leader also learned that a couple of weeks ago, a detachment of goblins attacked the city, most likely on someone's orders. According to rumors, a witch could be behind this because monsters don't like to be in groups. And there was also a pestilence. Monsters are running wild, and the climate is also getting colder. The most interesting thing is that a few years ago, strange structures appeared all over the continent. Residents began calling these ruins dungeons. There is no entry for ordinary people. An invisible barrier blocks their way. And at the end of the dungeons, according to rumors, there is a strange stone that can bestow special powers. Leo knew that this could only be one Advent stone, the source of the hero's third ability. Impringa? Not far from them, there was a detachment of mercenaries. The guy wanted the little one to take him to them. While the guys were walking to the dungeons, a wounded man who had already been there was carried to meet them. These ruins appeared immediately after the invasion, right in the center, next to the temple. This staircase is the entrance to the dungeons. It stood out from the surroundings and it was guarded by guards. You could find anything there. Gold and diamonds, valuable uniforms. It was just a gold mine. By the way, the Order has sole ownership of them, so they make good money on passes, and they also take a percentage of everything that the mercenaries manage to collect. The boy said that he had already earned his gold after leading Peter to the dungeon, so he left the young man. The boss noticed that people had a lot of equipment. Apparently they were going there for a long time. All the mercenaries are just hanging around, afraid to go inside, both those who can pass through the barrier and those who cannot. After watching for about an hour, the guy realized that the barrier lets through no more than 10%. Besides, if the leader can get inside, then his squad can do it too. After a while, the young guide runs up to the young man again. It turned out that the coin he gave him was very valuable, so he returned to work it off. Peter tried to get rid of the boy, since he no longer needed his services. The assistant tried to prove his usefulness by saying that he had learned that the witch had been slandered by the Order. But this information was not new to the commander. The little one continued to follow him, talking about his usefulness, that he could become his guide. Suddenly, the annoying child shouted that the young man was very similar to one of the guys with whom he grew up. He tried to remember the guy's name, but Peter quickly shut him up. The leader asked the newly appointed guide to take him to the jeweler. When they arrived, they saw a lot of armor, weapons, shields, and other interesting things. Joan also happened to be in this store and was glad to see the commander. The girl immediately began to show off her new enchanted bow. When Peter saw its characteristics, he realized that the archer had acquired complete garbage, which was only beautiful on the outside, but in fact not practical. He said that she could have bought something more valuable for 2 gold pieces. For example, elemental stones, they are necessary to create a strengthening stone. In addition to the elemental stones, there was a very valuable regeneration stone. It allows you to replay bosses, access to which is closed after clearing the level. The heroes will not receive points, but will be able to test themselves again on the mission. When the heroes were about to leave, Joan asked who this boy was following them, to which Peter replied that he did not know him. The boy tried to say something else, but the leader deftly shut him up by throwing a gold coin into his hands. Little George was extremely grateful and said that they would definitely make a profit on their investment in him. The boy insisted that he was ready to do a favor for the team, but Peter said that if he wanted, he could help the witch. Emptiness and misunderstanding appeared in his children's eyes. The heroes left, and the boy looked after them. The leader brought Joan up to date, saying that the princess was nicknamed a witch. They still had a lot of time and they decided to take a walk. After returning, Elizabeth said in disappointment that she could not get to the beach because it was closed. Apparently, the heroes are not allowed to go beyond a certain perimeter. New areas of exploration open every 10 levels, and they can only move across the entire map after the 100th floor. New faces appeared in the square. It turned out that about a week had already passed in the lobby. It seems that someone was able to reach the 2nd floor, and a new apprentice appeared in the workshop. The heroes had to have a good rest because tomorrow they would start training again. Charlie wanted to go to the arena now, but the leader categorically forbade him and ordered him to go and rest. There were some like him in Niflheimer. Most of them ended badly. You can't achieve everything just by going ahead. If you cannot achieve something, no matter how hard you try, then most likely you are not talented enough. Then it is better to find another path in life or die. The next day, the 2nd squad trained in the training arena from the very morning. Emma strictly trained the inexperienced Jerry in the art of battle. Joan was surprised when she saw that they were practicing with real swords. Peter noticed that Duke had disappeared somewhere, because the whole team was in the arena. The young guy who had been a member of their squad from the very beginning was no longer there. Soon, Matthew and Sarah were expelled from the 3rd squad. Changes were made to the housing. Now 2 strong newcomers lived on the 2nd floor. The daring young man immediately said that he liked it here. It was as if he had entered another world. It seems that the ranks of the main teams have begun to swell. Joan was already preparing for the draw, but the guy stopped her. It turns out that Duke was sent to the first floor because he could not kill anyone. Emma stated that due to the fact that there were too few of them in the squad, they decided to train even harder. It would be nice if the master added enough pumped-up heroes to them. Suddenly, Sarah stepped forward, showing a clear desire to be in the first squad. Strength is not her only skill. She has many of them, and they are all varied. Peter warned that it was not they who made the choice. He asked why she wanted to go to them, but the girl began to say that she thought that the rumors about them were exaggerated. But then she became convinced of the squad's strength herself, using the regeneration stone. The stone helps to replay already completed missions, or see the results of others. Usually it is used for replaying. But these two looked at the recordings of all their missions. It is logical that she wanted to join the strongest in order to survive herself. Matthew stated that he would also prefer the first squad. Then Jerry began to exclaim against their words, because no one wanted to join their squad. The leader asked if the heroes wanted him to make this choice himself. Emma sighed and muttered that she didn't want to force anyone to join their squad, even though it was smaller. After his decision, difficulties may begin, and Joan suggested casting lots. The boss didn't want to trust chance, but he also didn't want to trust others. Then he ordered to fight until one of them falls, so he will choose the strongest. The young man allowed them to fight as the heroes wished, since it was important for him to understand what they were capable of. At that moment, Sarah began to take poison out of her bag. Matthew looked at this woman with horror. He clearly did not expect this from her. The girl was well versed in poisons from the moment she appeared here. She applied a paralyzing poison that causes convulsions throughout the body at the tip. The young man said that she would not be able to test the effect of the poison on him and prepared for battle. After both heroes agreed to the duel, Peter ordered it to begin. Matthew at the same second madly rushed towards his opponent, and Sarah, in turn, built cold defense tactics. They fought with insane speed, flying all over the arena. Jerry was shocked by the impudent guy's abilities, since he fought with him himself, but apparently he did not fully realize his potential. The leader ordered to watch the battle carefully, as there was something to learn here. Their level of weapon proficiency is approximately the same, but they use different techniques in battle. Suddenly, Elizabeth appeared behind the commander, who was supposed to be on research at that time. At some point, a trump card in the form of a dagger appears from Sarah's sleeve. He accurately scratches Matthew's face and infects him with poison, although he almost managed to dodge. Paralysis overtakes him, and some parts of the body cease to function. He viciously plunges his sword into the stomach of the girl, who had relaxed, thinking she had won. Then he throws her against the iron mesh, after which she falls to the ground, thereby showing that the young man has won. Matthew turned to the boss to hear his decision regarding the distribution. Unexpectedly for everyone, Peter announces that Sarah is becoming team member number 1. The guy's face loses all the joy of victory. He is indignant why they didn't choose him. The only people who seem to understand what happened are Emma, Ronald, and Joan. It was a curious ending. Sarah allowed herself to be pushed into a corner so that Matthew would let his guard down. What she did earlier was just a ruse. All this was necessary in order to provide the opportunity to strike the decisive blow. The young man continued to press, relying on skill, and everyone else was too caught up in the battle to notice the cunning tactics. The winner was furious. He did not understand why he was not chosen. The leader explained that they needed a team member like Sarah to be more flexible. Although he appreciates his talent, unfortunately, he has no place in the first squad. And then he offers to fight with himself if Matthew has any questions. It was clear from his facial expression that he was not yet ready for this. However, he offered to fight Charlie instead. Although he was a spearman, who was mainly responsible for support, he believed that the guy could not even cope with this role. He watched the team fight. It was quite interesting, but one of them clearly wasn't up to the task. Do they really need a spearman so much that they are ready to turn a blind eye to his weaknesses? Joan immediately objected, assuring that Charlie was very good. Matthew decided to joke, saying that perhaps the heroes do not notice this only because they themselves are talented, but sometimes comfort pulls them back. Peter interrupted the beginning quarrel, explaining that although a spearman is not irreplaceable, in this case they need a good swordsman to replace them. Matthew was sure that he would be more useful than Charlie in any case. He approached him and challenged him to a fight. The heroes were scared and wary. No one expected such a turn of events. Peter noticed that Charlie is much longer than him, and if Matthew challenges him so confidently, then he can reconsider his decision. The guy, in turn, assured that if he loses, he can calmly go to the second squad. The leader saw that it cost Charlie more effort to force himself than usual and that things might not end very well. But the spearman is still more useful. They have worked together for so long, and if he is very behind in skills, he can be useful for a while longer. To cope with this situation, the guy needed a push, and soon he agreed. The boss repeated that the loser can forget about the first squad, of which there is only one winner. Both sides agreed to the duel, and it began. On one side was the focused and diligent Charlie, and on the other was the irrepressible Matthew. The long spear pointed towards the sharp sword, and the battle began. Although his opponent was strong, Charlie had a chance to win if he showed what he had learned. Both heroes had weapon proficiency at level 4. Of course, Matthew had several chips that the spearman did not have, but he had a huge advantage: experience. No matter who he was before he came here, Matthew certainly had no experience fighting monsters. The daring guy arrived here recently, and his experience is much less than that of his opponent. He has never even fought a boss. And I had never fought with such a spearman whose movements were incredible. Charlie, with quick and precise movements, attacked the enemy, who somehow managed to defend himself. Since ancient times, spears have been used for hunting. In wars, they have also proven their effectiveness at longer distances, making them very useful in large-scale battles. Unfortunately, they weren't that useful in one-on-one battles. The difference in battle distance between a sword and a spear was about a meter. In some cases, this gives a certain advantage, but at close range it often leaves the spearmen defenseless when attacked. Spears have shown their vulnerability even to daggers, and their attack range is much shorter than that of arrows. But all of the above is true in the case of ordinary people. In a place where the boundaries of human capabilities are exceeded regularly, this logic does not work. Even if Matthew was quite talented before appearing here, he was completely unfamiliar with the principles of life of the heroes here. Charlie fought with the leader in many trainings. He fought with those who are stronger than people and monsters. Joan noticed that her comrade was fighting well, but it was so unlike him. But at this rate, he was simply destroying his opponent. But the girl was asked to be more careful, because the number of his successful attacks had dropped sharply. This factor attracted Emma's attention. Charlie's technique is polished but straightforward. His downside is that all his actions are very predictable. In addition, Matthew has a very keen eye. Considering that he could easily calculate Sarah's attacks, it can be said that his observation skills are very well developed. Perhaps he will soon master a skill similar to Emma's mind's eye. Matthew asked why Charlie didn't target his weak spots, since in training they fought to the death. Peter realized that the spearman had relaxed. All his attacks were easy to calculate, only he could help him. He shouted at him, asking him when he started worrying about his opponent's life. Charlie pulled himself together and decided to show what he was capable of. His next attack was aimed between Matthew's legs. He managed to successfully jump up, and when he landed, he hit Charlie perfectly on the shoulder. A moment later, Charlie fell from hellish pain. The team hoped to the last that their friend would win. But, unfortunately, this did not happen. It was hard to describe the complex attack that helped defeat Matthew. But as the fight progressed, he figured out all of Charlie's fighting techniques. This was evident from the fact that he began to attack less. And as the fight progressed, he began to stop all his opponent's attacks. He was just waiting for the moment to solve the whole matter with one blow. Matthew knew that he only needed one attack to win, to minimize the chance of an unfortunate accident. In order to choose the perfect moment to attack, he repelled Charlie's countless attacks and did not miss his only chance. Cool and logical observation skills were combined with the ability to calculate the probability of one's victory, all of which required great patience. Peter kept his promise and appointed Matthew to be part of the first team. Charlie unfortunately left the squad due to the loss. The leader warned the newly arrived heroes that they must be prepared, that their missions were more dangerous than those of the second squad. After everyone had left, Peter turned to his disappointed former comrade, who was still sitting at the scene of defeat. He asked why he gave Matthew a chance to win, to which the spearmen said that they should not kill their comrades. He admitted that something had changed in him. He understood perfectly well that he was not that talented. He could win, and was even sure of it. But the further the fight went, the stronger the opponent became. He could not harm him, since these two newcomers are very important. Did Charlie have the right to kill someone who shone brighter than him? He did not see in himself what was in Peter and Joan. The fog over his future did not dissipate. It seemed to him that he was marking time. The boss realized that the young man was broken, but decided to support him by offering him a position as an instructor. They train new recruits in the training area on the ground floor, a job he's perfect for, just like Duke. The guys just have to train newcomers in a safe environment. Usually the competition for these places is simply prohibitive. It can reach up to 12 people per place, but he will give them his recommendations. Peter said that if the spearman does not want to, then there is no need to forcefully agree to this position. He knew someone just like Charlie. He also lacked talent. His spearman skills were also second level. He was terrible, and Leo tried to throw him out many times. Tears rolled down the young man's cheek and he fell to his knees, declaring that he wanted to become stronger. The leader supported him and said that even someone like him can become stronger. The main thing is not to doubt yourself. Moreover, another gate on the square will soon open, which will change a lot, so all that was left was to wait. Peter said that he would take Charlie to Niflheimer, assuring him that it was a very nice place. Meanwhile, in the square, friendly Joan tried to get to know the taciturn newcomers. The leader came up to them and told the girl that these two were still awkward, that's why they were acting like this. He told them that they were fighting with passion and dedication, which they should understand. The heroes must become heat-resistant, and the sooner they do this, the better. The leader did not care how the new ones would come to this, only the result was important. Smug Matthew said that a couple of days would be enough for him to do everything about everything, and Sarah decided to point out his place, saying that one would be enough for her. Peter turned to Joan, saying that she would now perform Charlie's functions. Matthew and the leader will fight in close combat, but he asked not to take everything upon himself, but to fight in such a way that Peter could always help him. Sarah had many different skills, wielding a sword, a dagger, fast movement, stealth, well-developed senses. She was even good at ambushes and creating poisons, and these were not all of her skills. The commander asked who the girl was before she ended up here. It turned out that she was some kind of killer. After analyzing everything, the young man ordered the girl to fight at medium distance, but if necessary, she would have to fight in close combat, protecting Joan and Elizabeth, and she could also go behind enemy lines. She also needed to collect information, and she would have to do this at any time. People like her may agree out loud, but if they don't like their role, then conflict cannot be avoided. Elizabeth decided to draw attention to herself by asking what she would need to do. Peter handed her sandbags, and the disappointed girl had to run around with them. After assigning roles, the leader turned to Emma, who was still short of team members. Unfortunately, no improvement is expected, since the master is not yet going to donate if she cannot find anyone. He suggested looking on the first floor. If you look carefully, you can always find someone worthwhile, especially since all the free summons have been used up, and there are about 20 heroes on the waiting list on the first floor, among whom there will clearly be someone talented. Emma agreed with the advice. The hero also warned her not to single out too much the one she considers more talented. Otherwise, it will lead to discrimination. In this environment, there are a lot of those who will begin to humiliate those trying to rise higher. The next day, Peter gathered 2 recruits outside the training hall, as it was necessary to find out their strengths and weaknesses. Naturally, there were no prohibitions on battle. The heroes could use real weapons. Matthew stepped forward with a pleased look. The leader asked if he really wanted to fight him without Sarah. He was delighted at the offer of a one-on-one duel with the strongest hero among them. The boss was satisfied with the guy's desire and efforts, so he went into berserk mode to start the fight.